Job interviews, career and life advice from just about everybody. Hello there. So today we are talking to Walker Peak, which sounds like sort of a made-up name for like a competitive hill walker or something. Is that a thing? Can you be one of those? Anyway, that's not what he is. He's a different thing. He just has a name that almost sounds like it's from a comic book. So Walker Peak is a business owner, an engineer, former NASA contractor, holds multiple advanced degrees, just super, super interesting person. And
He's
I
the
think
total package.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
He's Peak Walker, as maybe that should be. Anyway, whatever. I think you're very likely to get a lot out of this conversation, even if you don't see yourself going into business ownership or engineering or anything like that. Basically, every interview we've done, this is an interview where even if you are not, like I said, specifically interested in the limited things that Walker has done, you're not interested in doing those things for yourself, you will learn a lot for sure about some things that definitely will touch on aspects of life or professional choices that you will very probably find interesting at some point in the future. This will be very useful for you to know as you make your own plans and projections for what you'd like to do after high school and or college.
Yeah, Walker was somebody who, as he grew up, he knew he wanted to start a business. He was always into that, but he didn't really have any idea what that would be. You know, sometimes we talk to people or you hear about people who have a certain passion from early on, and it's in a certain specific area. You know, you love, I don't know, board games or coding or something. But that wasn't Walker's story.
Those are two very nerdy things to be.
Yeah.
Or just like manga or I mean, you love being a fighter pilot or something.
Carpentry. Yeah. So whatever it is, actually, those are all valid things that you could love.
Fantastic things to learn. Yeah. Less nerdy than the other things.
Those are a longer list. Thank you, Mike, for chiming in. Some people have that specific thing. Oh, I really love this. And Walker didn't have that as far as an actual like content area to go into. But he wanted to start a business. So, and a lot of people, I think, have that kind of, it can relate to that feeling of, I kind of generally want this sort of job, but I don't even really know what that would mean or what it's going to be like. And even, I think it was in college that he will find out he did some brainstorming and finally had that idea of what to even go into when he was almost through most of his schooling at that point. So yeah, I think that's a very relatable position to be in where he was when high school was this kind of nebulous, like, oh, I want a business, but what does that even mean yet?
Yeah. And so touching on what Patrick just said, and not to give away too much of what Walker discusses in a moment, but one thing you'll find here that I think is very interesting and anyone can really apply it is the idea of having sort of structured ways of solving problems. Yeah. That's one thing that's a huge theme, motif, if you will, that extends sort of all throughout Walker's life. And certainly it's something that you can borrow no matter what field you plan to go into. It's just a good way to deal with things as they come up, to already have sort of set models and things that you can refer to.
Yeah, this is something that it comes up a lot. But our goal with these episodes, it's pretty much never to show you like the one way to do something, because there isn't the one way to do something. There's just a million different ways that a million different people have done things, and some of them have things in common, and some of them don't. And it's always very instructive to see what a person has done. And Mike described, Walker has this very structured way of solving problems that it's worked super well for him. And it can be a useful tool for sure for just about anybody. You don't have to use this exact thing, but it's definitely useful to see it in action. And even if you don't use it so consistently and throughout your life the way Walker has, if you're ever stuck on something, this could definitely be a useful tool to have in mind. So yeah, we'll talk about Walker starting his business. We'll kind of see that. But what goes along with that is, making his own website and going online and training himself on how to do that and teaching himself various skills along the way, learning about dealing with employees and HR and that human resources. As he gets his company going, there's so many interesting obstacles. And certainly for you, if and when you are an employee sitting across from someone, the insights you can kind of gain from hearing about the boss's perspective, it's definitely a useful thing to be aware of.
Yeah. So without further ado, let's go take a peek at what Walker has to.
Let's walk over.
Let's walk. What else can we do here? Reclaw? No, that's Walker backwards. Anyway,
let's keep reclawing.
Walker Peak. He should use that as the title of his autobiography if he ever writes one.
Yeah.
Keep reclawing, :
You could really
the Walker Peak story.
Go down the rabbit hole with this. We'll be back at the end of this episode with the best
with more takes
sentence using
on Walker Peak's
front
name.
and backwards,
Yeah.
forwards and backwards. Yikes! All right, here we go. Many students think that SAT and ACT questions about grammar and style must be completely subjective, because it seems impossible to know for sure which version of a sentence will be the one that seems best to the people who write the test. But it turns out that these question types actually follow strict, predictable rules and standards, just like every other part of the test. And once you learn those rules and standards, you can find the right answer with certainty and without subjectivity. To find out more, look for our SAT Prep Black Book 2nd edition and our ACT Prep Black Book 2nd edition on Amazon.com. Hello, we are here today with Walker Peak of Commercial Acoustics. Could you, in your own words, describe what your job is, what you do?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me here, guys.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure.
It's a much bigger favor that you're doing us than we're doing you.
Exactly. Thanks for taking up my afternoon. Anyway, yes.
So Walker Peak with Commercial Acoustics. I'm the president of the company. I started it 5 years ago, and we're basically an acoustic consulting and engineering firm. We also sell a number of acoustical and soundproofing products.
Cool. Is this a lifelong passion of yours? Is this something that if we were talking to you when you were in high school, would you say, I'm going to grow up and start a business about acoustics? Or
Well, I knew I wanted to start a company. I've always been like very passionate about kind of being an entrepreneur.
Okay.
I had no interest in acoustics like growing up.
What did you think you might start a company in?
I thought it would be engineering, which is why I've kind of blended that into our product offering and like service offering.
That makes
But
sense.
like acoustics, I'm not like a musician.
Yeah.
I'm not like an audiophile who loves music and mixing and
it's
stuff.
always been a thing for you or anything. Yeah.
Right. The opportunity presented itself and just kind of went for it.
So can you describe how that opportunity presented itself? What happened?
Yeah. So it was my girlfriend, wife at the time, living together in Tampa, which is where we are now. I was still working part-time. I just read a book, The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. Very dangerous.
Read that
Yeah.
Fills your head with a bunch of ideas.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Pandora's box of a book. Yeah.
And some of them are good ideas.
Absolutely.
But some of them are maybe not as great. And so, I was looking for like a side hustle at the time. I wasn't super thrilled with my job, although it was a cool career path. I was working as a NASA contractor for Craig Technologies. My girlfriend was studying for med school upstairs, studying the board. So she was finishing med school. And she just thought I was making way too much noise down there and I had to keep it down. And I couldn't talk to my buddy or listen to basketball. We were drinking some beers.
Yeah.
And so we're like, we need to find a problem. And she's like, shut up. We're trying to study here. So.
Shut up, you're causing a problem.
Well, there's a problem.
Yeah.
So that was the initial kind of genesis of the idea was, hey, let's come up with a soundproofing product. A soundproofing curtain was the initial product.
Okay.
And it went over the door to block sound. Started the website, started kind of growing it that way. Direct to consumer, as we were discussing before, we started taping here.
Yeah.
And direct to consumer has its benefits, but also its challenges. And so we pivoted to do more of a B2B sale, and that's commercial acoustics.
Yeah.
And that's who we are.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when you said we were searching for a problem, were you like literally at that moment talking like, I wish we had a problem?
Yes.
Were you,
Yes. Yeah. Like me and my buddy were like, dude, we want to start a company. And he's like,
Only the universe would make me aware of a problem.
It was just perfect time. We actually had a notepad. We were like listing all potential problems, and we added that one on there. And
Dude, I'm just curious, what other problems were you talking about that like did you have anything you were interested in?
Well, I always like keep kind of a notebook of ideas. So one of them right now is like recycling. It's such a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
Like old ink cartridges and
Certain
things like
things
that.
You don't
So
know what to do with them. Yeah.
exactly.
Or old batteries.
Exactly. Things that are really valuable still, but it's like, how are you going to get it back to the factory
You don't
to
just leave
reuse
it
it?
out by your front door and somebody comes off. And takes it away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we had some other ones. Like one of them was like a gas glove, so you don't get your hand dirty and filthy when you use the gas pump.
I feel like maybe for your sake, you should stop listing all of these really good ideas.
No, I actually published them for a while. Like I had like a little startup website. I was like, hey, anybody who wants these ideas, please use them, because I'm not going to
I
give
thought of doing that because I have like a lot of things.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm never going to have time to pursue that.
They're probably most of them
And,
are
like,
awful, but like mine anyway.
Probably most of them are
Your
awful.
ideas are probably real dumb.
I don't think anybody wants those. But yeah, I understand that feeling of like, I wish this existed, but I don't have time to do anything about
Right.
it. Yeah. Huh. So can you describe, so you were there having that conversation, taking these notes, you have this sort of lightning strike idea that hits you. What's like the next step you took? Like, did you register a domain? Did you, what
so we had like 20 ideas listed out. Recycling was one of them. I got this guy in my neighborhood who would come around and everybody's recycle bins and trash cans. Like you were throwing out like a 4-post bed or something like that. And he would come and pick it up in his pickup truck, take it to the recycling place and get like $100 for all the steel and aluminum
for the metal.
in there.
Those,
And I was like, man, it's crazy that we just throw things away and we like it's impossible to get picked up. And so me and my buddy walked around for a few nights and grabbed stuff out of people's recycle bins and like we tried to weigh them and see how much they were worth and took them to the recycle plant. So we did basically this list of 20 ideas. We gave 2 metrics for them. One was likelihood of success, 1 to 10. And the other one was, if it is a success, how profitable will it be?
Okay.
And we kind of measured those against each other, picked the 3 with the highest aggregate score, and then did prototypes on each of them, the recycling, the gas glove, and the acoustic curtain.
Did you make up that metric of we're going to...
Yeah, where did you learn those? Where did you get the idea of those metrics?
So I was in grad school at the time doing business school up at Columbia, and it was a distance learning education. I was supposed to be up there a few times a year. But it's funny, now online school is like very popular, but Columbia, they called the Columbia Video Network, CVN. It was around in like the 70s. Really? You would order like a VHS, like a videotape. They would mail it to you, and you would have to go get your HR person or whatever to proctor your exams.
Wow.
So
I had no idea that.
I did not know anything about that.
They were like the original one. I think them and Stanford maybe were the top 2. And so
was this basically the same like content and stuff, or was just this entity existed back from then? I assume it's
I think the content's changed a lot. Like they were one of the ones that came up with the financial engineering metrics for that led to the 08-09 crash.
Oh really?
Right. It was the Gaussian copula is what it's called. It's like a financial derivative analysis tool, and it's one of the things that led to the crash.
Yikes.
Wow.
So
Gaussian copula.
Yeah. I'm surprised I remember that word.
Sounds like a constellation or a starship.
Right. It sounds like the bad guy in a sci-fi movie.
I took
everybody should have known that was going to go wrong.
Right.
And it was like 10 courses, and most of them I took and cared about were entrepreneurship or like business courses, but like half of them were engineering, half were business school. And so this one course was like, hey, entrepreneurship, how to determine product ideas. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. How to Gaussian on the copula.
Yeah.
Did you, so this was grad school. Did you, in undergrad, plan that you would eventually go to business school? Or
I did a minor in business at UF, and UF, like, it was kind of a party school.
You could definitely follow that path if you wanted.
Yeah, it was Title Town at the time.
Of course it was.
I was there from 05 to...
There was for the audience, there was a period of like 24 months or something.
We just won every championship.
Where they just won every like major sporting championship. Football was like 3 times, I think.
Football, basketball, track,
basketball was,
softball or baseball, at least one of those, maybe both. It was... Yeah. What a time. Anyway.
It was a good time to be but at the same time, UF is actually a really good public school too. I mean, it was always ranked number 5 to 7 top public schools like UCLA, UVA, and also
Michigan, like value-wise and everything.
Oh, totally.
And in engineering in particular, I think they're pretty strong.
Yeah, they have a few specific programs that are, I think, extra strong. So you were there.
I was there. I did engineering at UF, structural, civil engineering, structures focus, and then I did a minor in business. And then I knew I wanted to start my own engineering firm. Pretty early on, I had a mentor of mine, Carol Craig. If you're listening, shout out.
She's probably not, but thank you. Thank you for assuming somebody might be.
But she's a very impressive entrepreneur, and she taught me a lot. We have definitely different styles and different focuses, but I learned how to start a company and from her.
How did you come to be connected with her?
From church growing up.
Okay, so you knew her from way back.
Yeah, when we were like, I was a kid. She's probably like 10 or 15 years older. She's friends with my folks.
All right.
Do you remember the moment when you decided or started thinking, gosh, I'm probably really going to want to have my own engineering firm?
I wish it was
were you
earlier.
5? Were you-
I remember like I just loved her lifestyle. She was probably like early 30s and I was like 15 or something. I was like, man, it's so cool. You just like get to do whatever you want. It's like, that sounds like a good idea. I mean, like, I played sports, but I wasn't like a great athlete. So I knew that wasn't going to be a thing. So I was like,
this will only get me so far.
So like, well, that's something I'm pretty smart. I think I can figure that out.
Yeah.
So.
That's really cool.
So getting back to, you said you took the top 3 scores, on this metric so the metric was it directly from these courses pretty much?
No, it was just kind of a blended, just
so it's kind of your own,
exactly.
Like, we'll approximate these important ideas with these 2 things.
Exactly.
So you took the top 3 from that and then you made prototypes?
Work them up. Yeah.
Prototypes or like at least like minimum viable products.
Yeah.
It was an Eric Ries book back in, I don't know, 10 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
Also a phrase from the 4-hour work week.
Yeah, exactly.
Minimum viable product.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I just happened to read both of those right about the same time. I was like, yeah, let's just get it out there. See if anybody wants it. So we take a photo. And at that point I did go ahead and buy a URL, residential-acoustics.com from like HostGator. I really like that one because you buy the domain and host it at the same place. So it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
And just took some photos like in my bedroom. And I found this mass loaded vinyl type of product that goes inside the curtain. I bought a sewing machine. I learned how to sew.
Cool.
And there's a thing called a bobbin, like a sewing machine.
I've heard that word.
Yeah,
I know the
it's
word.
a disaster. It's just, it was such a
Stay away from bobbins.
Oh man, I have so much more respect for like my mom now because she came down and saved the day. She's like, I'll show you how to do it. You got to thread the bobbin. So that was hard. But we got a prototype. I hung it over the window and I just couldn't hear the cars go by. And I'm like, whoa. It actually worked. I was like shocked. I was like literally shocked. I was like, I cannot believe that worked. And I was like, this is the best one. Like the recycling, I think there's still a business opportunity out there.
Yeah.
The gas glove, we did some prototypes, but they didn't come along very quickly. And then this one.
So of the 3, this felt like the clear, as soon as you started working on it, like this one obviously has merit.
Exactly.
So when you made that first prototype, did a lot of your engineering experience come into play making that, or was it more of a straight?
Yeah, like could anyone have made that the way you made it, you think?
Point,
or they would have needed your background?
So I did take a class at Columbia that was very useful called industrial engineering. It was like industrial design, not from a sense of making things pretty and like nice, smooth shapes and stuff like Apple and Porsche, like making beautiful designs. Yeah. It's not aesthetically, like but functionally. Yeah. And it's called TRIZ, TRIZ. I don't recall if that stands for something, but
sounds like it should.
I bet it does. Yeah. I bet it does. But basically, you basically break down all of the core components and the features of a product, and you kind of rank them each 1 to 10. Also, so like I knew it had to be relatively easy to open and close, but how important was that versus functionally how much sound did I want to block? Because those are diametrically opposed. The heavier something is, the more sound it's going to block. Yeah. Usually, or at least there's a correlation there. Whereas people aren't going to want to use it if it's too heavy,
Yeah. So I can't put it on the curtain or whatever.
Ease of installation was a big thing. Cost was a major factor.
Sure.
Aesthetics was a factor, but we realized it was relatively low. So we basically just kind of did like a focus group and broke all these down. And I started attacking them one at a time. How do you attach it to the wall? How do you do this, this, and that? So I think in hindsight, anybody could do it, but it certainly gave me an advantage that I had worked as a product engineer at Kennedy Space Center for 4 or 5 years doing manufacturing.
We're going to get back to that later because that sounds really interesting.
I think that helped from a manufacturing and design perspective, but grad school helped from hey, you can make anything. You just got to break down what's
People
important.
Just make stuff.
Yeah.
Like you need a secret power.
Exactly.
Well, and it sounds like it did a lot to help structure your thinking.
I think
it kind of sounds like it's maybe less on the actual design itself, but more like learning to prioritize. What do I need to?
Exactly.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. So you had the idea. You scored the ideas. You came up with the top 3. This one was a pretty solid one. Mom saves the day with the bobbin knowledge to help you.
Yeah, what if your mom hadn't known how to handle bobbins? We wouldn't be sitting here. You would have gone to the gas glove.
So you came up with one that worked pretty well. Mm-hmm. So the next step after that,
took a photo, install WordPress on the website, install WooCommerce as like an e-commerce.
You did this yourself up to this point?
Yeah. YouTube with 2 monitors, YouTube on one and WordPress on the other.
Yeah.
YouTube to me is the greatest educational source in the history of the world.
It's like what college was supposed to be.
It really is.
What do you want to learn?
But it's on demand.
Yeah.
Your house, on your phone, every moment of your life.
I love, like
information.
Wikipedia is amazing also,
Sure.
but YouTube is like, how do I install this? Okay, well, I type that in and 18 YouTube videos pop up with, and then you find the guy who's got the best YouTube video and you just follow
and
all
once
of his
you find
tutorials.
the good channels, it's amazing.
And so he taught me everything. You know, I did some HTML, CSS, a little bit of JavaScript and PHP to just make the website functional and kind of flow.
Yeah.
People started adding it to their cart and buying it. I was like, what? This is crazy.
Who are these people?
Yeah.
So did you do anything with like SEO, which is search engine optimization, for like to try to get the people to come to your
Like, how
site?
did you get the
We
traffic?
do a lot of that nowadays. That's our number one growth opportunity from a marketing perspective is SEO. In fact, my marketing coordinator, Rachel, is at the digital marketing seminar that's downtown right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's at the Tampa Convention
I
Center.
didn't even know that was happening.
And my sister
should
flew
probably
in
be
last
there.
night.
Well, also, since we live in Tampa and are into that, they should have marketed it.
That's
too.
true. Who are these guys?
They
No, but yeah, that's
Digital
really cool.
Summit 2019.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
We need to go to the 2021, I guess.
Yeah.
So, for these initial customers, as you said, people started adding it and buying it. Do you know where they came from? Was it advertising? Did you have a little SEO?
We didn't
right
do
off the bat?
PPC, like pay-per-click Google advertising, but it was definitely some SEO. I started writing blogs, and back 4 or 5 years ago, that's a lot of what SEO was, and it still is, quite frankly. It's just like content marketing.
Well, and also if you have kind of a niche product that isn't dominated by tremendous companies with like tons of
Resources.
content production,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Then you could sort of rapidly climb up.
Nobody was going for
You become the guy
soundproof curtain,
who's right.
like
Really?
super niche, 15,000 searches per month, but there was two companies out there
going for it,
even relatively interested in it.
Yeah.
Because nobody could make it at our price point. We started manufacturing in-house. I got seamstress on Craigslist, rented like 1,000 square feet of the factory space downtown Tampa. And we were just able to keep costs super low so we could sell it for $100 or $150, where there was one other company out there selling a soundproof blanket you had to hammer into your wall, versus ours was somewhat aesthetic. It has its limitations, but it gets
more than
by.
a blanket with nails in it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Which I already have at my house, by the way. I ordered that. I got to hammer up a blanket. So that's interesting. So you, as far as you know, that initial set of orders was you put up some articles. They just found you through that and ended up. Awesome.
Cool.
And probably our big pivot after that to kind of focus on our company that we talk about nowadays, commercial acoustics, is one day people started calling. I was doing, not really sewing anymore at this point. I got somebody for that, but I was still taking all the calls, writing all the content, taking care of financials and accounting and that kind of stuff. And then somebody called, hey, my neighbor upstairs is real loud. Can you please help me with that? I said, no, you can't really do anything. Well, can I put like a rug on my ceiling? I was like, I don't think that's going to help. And I can tell you now, it definitely does not. Now that I actually know what I'm doing, it does not help. And so we just realized, hey, over and over, like 4 people called in a row. I'm like, God, stop saying no to these people.
So, this is something people want.
Totally. And because I was an engineer, I knew how to work with architects and contractors. And I said, hey, I started calling them, hey, before you guys build your next one, I got like 4 calls from somebody who lives in your previous one and they hate it.
Everybody hates your buildings.
and they were like, well, what can we do? What should we do differently? So I started selling product into the actual buildings themselves.
So during the construction phase, these materials are added to the physical structure.
Exactly.
For this exact purpose.
Exactly. And it's such a niche market. Nobody knew how to do acoustic consulting and product sales. So I could find the exact product with the thickness and the dimensions and all the characteristics they needed. So I found a few manufacturers, partnered with them, and that's what's kind of brought us to where we are today.
That's awesome. So do you, as you said, like, nobody was targeting soundproof curtains. Do you find that when you contact these businesses, do you say, hey, I do this? And they're like, oh, nobody else does that. Like, we need you. Or are there other people kind of doing this and you just have this in sort of with them because of your experience?
Nobody who does exactly what we do, because we do acoustic panels for like restaurants and churches and worship centers. We do soundproofing for walls, like in apartments and condos and movie theaters. We'll do sound masking for like offices, like white noise. And then I'm myself, along with one other engineer, are the 2 acoustic consultants. So by blending all those capabilities, we can come into a space and be like, hey, you need masking. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can tell them what they need and then
and
Get it
right
for
sizes.
them. Yeah.
Exactly. Because you go to a panel company, acoustic panel company with a sound blocking issue, they'll sell you panels,
Yeah.
whether
Sure.
you need them or not.
Yeah, that makes
So are there specific, this question might sound really ignorant. Are there specific like mathematical formulas and things that you need to know? If you can like measure a certain amount of sound, then you need a certain amount of dampening. If there are those kinds of things, how did you learn them, and how large or small of a role does that play in your day-to-day existence?
So another mentor of mine was when I was out there looking for manufacturers, trying to find a good product. And there are quite a few products in the flooring under limit space, very few in the wall soundproofing, which is a huge part of every building.
yeah.
So the great, market opportunity there. My mentor gave me a few textbooks, Architectural Acoustics Illustrated and Architectural Acoustics by David M. Egan. They're still over on my bookshelf over there, and I've probably read each of them about 4 times now.
Wow.
And then there's a lot of like PDFs out there, ASTM specifications. I forgot what that stands for, but it's
I hope the T is also the same T in Triz.
Yeah, right.
It's probably not.
Yeah, American Sound, Triz Magic.
And these are standards that exist, and they cost like $40 a pop. And I probably bought about 10 or 15 of them and just read them. So there are measurements and there are engineering standards, STCs, IICs, NRCs that you need to understand to do what we do.
Mhm.
It's not super complicated. It's not like mechanical or structural engineering where you need like a ton of
moving
analysis.
parts. Yeah.
But you need to be systematic. You need to say, hey, there's a kitchen next to an office. What STC do I need? Or there's an office next to an office, So it's all about adjacencies. What does each wall need to block?
Are these all these acronyms you just listed? Did you know about these back in engineering school, or do you just once you got into this,
Got out there in the world?
search?
I learned it now.
Okay.
Yeah, but I learned it about 4 to 5 years ago, right after the curtains had kind of taken off and we were pivoting to the B2B business.
Yeah. So you were selling the curtains. How many different products were you selling when you were still selling to residential?
Just the one, really. I mean,
So
like
a
two
curtain
to
that went
three
over a window,
versions of it.
basically? Yeah.
Yeah, but that's it.
Did it come, like different colors or sizes?
Oh,
or-
yeah. So they were like, everyone's basically custom made to order. So yeah, there were a lot of different, like red, blue, green, like probably about
cool.
20 colors and then lots of different sizes.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it was still just one core product.
Yeah.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
And nowadays it's still a good product for us, but by far our biggest product's called the wall blocker. Last year, we sold it in about 50 different countries around the world.
Wow.
Well, actually, I'll say in the last 3 years, about 50 countries, most, if not every state in the US. And we sell it into movie theaters, apartments, condos, anywhere where you need to block sound, basically.
Yeah.
Because what architects traditionally have done is they put a wall up, and then if they need to block more sound, they just double up the drywall. So they add 2 layers of drywall on each
That's
side.
like the one solution.
The worst way to do it, like the least efficient way to ever block more sound. Because the sound, and this is something we learned in high school, is in physics, is sound travels faster in a denser medium. So
Yeah.
like underwater,
So you're like speeding it up.
you're speeding it up. You're helping the sound pass through the
Getting
wall
the
by
sound to
adding
the
more
people faster.
drywall. Yeah, it's kind of insane.
That's
But
funny.
nobody knows that. The drywall guys
Nobody's
don't
focused
know.
on
The
that,
GCs
yeah.
are.
Well, that kind of, when you said that made me think that the sales pitch might be kind of easy, at least in some circumstances, to be like, hey, not only do you not know what you're doing, but the thing you're doing is like worse
You're
than if you did nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
But that kind of leads to another question. How did you develop what I'll call your pitch? I don't know if you think of it as a sales pitch, but your presentation when you would go out to these architectural firms and those kinds of companies and present yourself.
Mhm.
How did you develop that presentation, whatever it looks like now? And was there any kind of formative experience? Like, did you have theater training when you were younger, or any public speaking? Like, how did you develop the confidence and knowledge to go do that?
I've always been very. My wife would say loud. I'll say outspoken.
I've heard that kind of thing before myself.
I'm a loud guy. I like public speaking. It's like fun for me. And
Well, you're killing it right now.
but the lunch and learn we call is our pitch to architect groups. I'm doing Universal Studios tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
So we probably do one a week. I haven't actually done one in several months. I have 2 full-time salespeople. We're opening up a 3rd office in Orlando right now where we'll teach him the pitch as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's 1 hour. You have a captivated audience, and basically you go with a slide deck, usually 25 to 30 slides. And I just kind of created it over a week and a half or 2 weeks, we had to get it blessed by AIA, American Institute of Architects.
Okay.
And I'll try to dial down the acronyms. We have like a ton of them, like 15 minutes.
We'll ask if we need to, but
Yeah.
And so they had to bless it so that I could show that I'm actually teaching architects something valuable. And there are a lot of lunch and learns out there are much less educational than ours, like furniture dealers and stuff. Hey, check out these new chairs. But really, you're feeding them, you bring them lunch, you give them an AIA credit.
I'd do that.
Yeah. And they need these credits to maintain their license, you know? So
Really?
the architects, they need like
So it's like a
18
continuing education kind of a thing for
So
them.
this is specific to architects. I've never heard the term lunch and learn. So that's
designers do. I think a lot of firms do
It's
them.
I'd say it's a fairly common way to pitch like an office on something, whatever the office is and whatever the.
Because that way they don't have to go anywhere. Now it's good for architects because we are AIA certified, so that we can give them one of their 18
one of the credits.
Exactly.
I remember my first job was not my first job, but the first like corporate job that I had. We used to get like lunch and learns all the time, but they were for like financial planning, like kind of personal things for you as an employee. And you could go if you wanted free lunch, and then some company would try to sell you on whatever.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you would reach out to these organizations and just say,
is there like a lunch and learn calendar you can easily get on, or
not online? It's not that you basically, it's kind of old school. You do have to pick up the phone and call. Kind of, and just say, hey, when's your next lunch and learn available? You usually talk to the office admin or the office manager or somebody, some gatekeeper. And then, but we do a lot of networking. There's a lot of AIA events in town. Okay. Just kind of rub and show and be like, hey, I'd love to give a lunch and learn. And they realize that there is nobody else doing what we do.
Sure.
So they pretty much do say yes.
And the thing that you're doing is super valuable. Yeah. Which is something that we've touched on a little bit in other episodes. I think that a lot of our younger listeners might be sort of averse to the idea of sales or pitching or that kind of thing. Because until you get out in the world and see that it's not bad, you sort of have a negative connotation, I think, for a lot of people. But when the product that's being sold and the service that's being sold is useful and beneficial and helpful, and there's no other way that the person could know about it unless you get their attention and say, hey, here's this thing you need to know, that seems like it would work pretty well. It sounds like a mutually
beneficial thing. And as long as, of course, you're being honest and direct about what you're doing, there's no reason to have this kind of view that Mike mentioned about, like, and I think a lot of people have it. It's just this like suspicion of sales stuff, but that's, you're going to be in the business world.
And
sales is hard to avoid.
I don't like sales particularly. I like talking about the product and the business, but like, if they don't need it, oftentimes we'll be the first one to tell them that. Hey, you guys really don't need this here.
Right. Because that also, it can hurt your reputation if you get a reputation for selling people on things they don't actually need. Right. And when you're dealing with a professional audience, especially like they're very trained in that area, they can probably tell if they need it, and so if they know they don't need it and you can tell that they don't need it, it's not like you're going to fool them into thinking they need it,
Yeah, totally.
So
is this, the lunch and learns, would you say that's maybe your main way to connect with people who might need your services? Or
so that's our main go-to-market for a lot of our products and services is through the architect community.
Yeah.
However, with SEO, we do get a lot of inbound traffic. So the church guy who called earlier, hey, my sanctuary is super loud, or restaurant owners, we get a lot of clubhouses. Hey, it's super loud in here. Another equation we use is called Sabin's formula, which is, pay attention in math class, because there actually is a lot of, summation principles and stuff that's super helpful for me. So basically the formula, I won't break it down now, but basically it's, you use the volume of the room, so length, width, and height, and then you use the surface acoustic absorption coefficient of each surface.
Okay.
And you kind of add them all up, and then you get what the reverb time of the space is.
Okay.
So if it's a super reverberant room, that's not good if you have speaking engagements in there.
Yeah.
If it's a gym, if it's in, people are playing basketball, no big deal. But if it's a, auditorium, and sometimes those are in the same room.
Yeah.
So you have to,
exactly.
So you have to prepare the space as if it's an auditorium, because when somebody's on the microphone and nobody can hear them, that's a problem.
Wow. A useless room.
Exactly.
Hey, I have a question for you. If somebody asked you what the difference was between the SAT and the ACT, what would you say? Most people would say that the ACT is more of a test of what you actually learn in high school, while the SAT is more of a test of abstract reasoning or something like that. People usually believe this because the ACT has done a very good job of marketing itself as a different kind of test from the SAT. But the differences between the ACT and the SAT are actually much smaller than most people realize, especially when you compare the two tests on a question-by-question basis. What I mean by that is that most of the questions that appear on one test could appear in basically the same way on the other test. And understanding this important fact can help you a lot in your college admissions strategy. To learn more, listen for the special segment at the end of this episode. And for more on the ACT and SAT, head over to questprep.com or search for the SAT Prep Black Book or the ACT Prep Black Book on Amazon.com.
So you mentioned when you kind of had the proof of concept and you made the curtain and it worked, that you rented office space and you found a seamstress on Craigslist. Did you have money saved up? I think a lot of people who think about a business, they're, how do I get started financially?
Mm-hmm.
How are you able to come up with the money, I guess, to do that? Did you have investors?
I'm super like financially conservative. I had a buddy, Dylan, who had I was like, hey man, let's start with like $3,000.
Mm-hmm.
So he had $3,000. He was about 10 years older than me. It still is. And he's not like dead.
Yeah.
Or, he's actually getting married pretty soon.
Oh,
so yeah.
Way to go.
And so yeah, good buddy. And he lives here in town. We're still very friendly, but he gave me $3,000. He was a partner, but not super involved because he had a really good paying job and had a lot of responsibilities. So he helped me like logistically with some stuff. And I ended up paying him out a few years later, like $15,000. So I made like a 5x return over 18 months, which is good.
Yeah.
And he got to enjoy, the hustle. Him and his brother had done something similar, like not like acoustics, but they had done a startup in the past. Yeah.
That's cool. So did you reach out to a lot of people, or you kind of knew he would be somebody who...
Oh, this is the guy who was... Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
So he was
kind of
from
the beginning.
Exactly.
It was understood that you would be kind of the guy, like it would be more your company.
It was 75-25. That was the original arrangement. We read a book called Slicing Pie, which is like how to set up equity arrangements in a startup. Operating agreements don't need to be 50 or 100 pages, just a single page of just writing it down. 75% Walker's in charge of product dev, marketing, and like whatever else is left.
Knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. Bobbin knowledge. And Dylan was in charge of, hey, put in $3,000 and then help with logistics and sales. And then time just didn't work out with him. He was just super busy. So we ended up buying him out, and it was a very positive relationship for both of us.
That's really cool.
So one thing that you have mentioned a lot of times is the idea that you read a book on something and kind of applied the principles from that book, or just sort of had it in the background. Where did you acquire that love of reading? And do you read mostly nonfiction business kind of stuff, or can you talk to us about your reading habits?
It's probably 70-80% nonfiction. I read what I need to read to like feel like I'm improving the company or improving myself. Like Warren Buffett's, his big thing is like every day, never stop improving or learning. That's the main thing that sets apart successful people from unsuccessful, is they keep learning or teaching themselves.
Which YouTube is a huge help for us.
Oh,
you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so it's not just reading. I actually,
resource.
Yeah, totally. I listen to Audible probably every single day. Yeah. So it's maybe half the time I read, half the time I listen, and most of it's nonfiction. Winning by Jack Welch is a freaking amazing book about like HR development, because I had no training in that. And I'll tell you, it's still probably my biggest weakness is
really
the difference between managing and leading, how to deal with needy employees, or how to, encourage the ones that are doing really well, and how to try to fix issues with other ones that can be problematic.
Yeah.
Employees are very delicate creatures at times. And
well, we all are.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, so much of business, and this has come up in other interviews, so much of any kind of pursuit you have as an adult in the world is working with other people, whether they're your coworkers, bosses, employees, like people are different, and you don't really know how different people are until you're trying to make some kind of enterprise with them. And you might
different from each other and different from you. Whatever you think is the standard thing that all people have is not.
And it's really it's interesting because, here you are, you're an engineer in an engineering world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's other components as well, but it's unavoidable. Like if you're going to have something past a certain size, there's going to be other people involved, and that's a skill.
There's customer service, there's sales, which is a big difference. Like in mindset, there's manufacturing. So, and nowadays, luckily we grew to a scale that we were able to stop outsourcing most of our products and just bringing them in-house, which is
great. Saw in the back, your whole warehouse area, guys. That's awesome.
Totally. Yeah, we're really happy.
Right,
Our first place, no air conditioning.
this was the 1,000 square foot place.
Exactly.
About, really?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we kind of bought out a little bit more each year, like a couple hundred square feet
Little
here and
more
there.
space.
We subleased from a cabinetry shop, so there was a lot of dust.
Wow.
And that wasn't very smart when you have curtains with fabric.
Yeah.
So,
Grabbing all the dust.
Probably.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we had clients calling, "Hey, why is there like like wood chunks on my curtain?" So that was a problem.
Yeah.
We learned a lot. Over there.
Wow. Kind of along the lines of teaching yourself and always trying to improve and that kind of thing. How would you say, if at all, the technology that you use to run the company has changed? And where do you get, if you have sort of upgraded things or changed, for example, software systems or manufacturing systems or anything like that, where do you learn about the best new things to try?
Mhm.
And how do you make those decisions about, okay, let's switch to this software or that software?
I mean, I got to say YouTube once again. I'll definitely Google it first. So early on, we used Word and Excel for everything. And I'm like an Excel guy. This is what I love Excel because you can use it for so much. You can write macros and basically make it your own computer software with very basic programming knowledge. But when we started doing like real accounting, we used QuickBooks or a different one called Xero, and we had to learn about that. We started using Workflow Max for project management instead of just emailing, "Hey, are you going to be on site tomorrow?" You have to have that information, disseminated to the right people.
Everybody can access
totally
information. Yeah.
And like Salesforce, that's a big one for our sales team. It's a CRM. And that one's kind of that's a gorilla. And I mean, they really own a huge market share, I feel like.
Yeah.
Although there's hundreds of CRMs out there, literally.
And CRM, by the way, for the audience, is customer relationship management.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's a way that you, as a business owner, can make sure if someone calls in with a problem that you're following up with it appropriately, and you can see how it's been done in the past, how you should maybe change it for the future. Those kinds of things, right?
Exactly.
So you can track the relationships you have with each individual customer and where they are right now, what they need. And
when,
is that also for sales leads as well? Or
so sales leads as well.
Yeah.
So like you go out to a networking event, you meet 30 people, maybe 5 of them are architects or contractors, and maybe 2 of them say, "Hey, actually I have a project right now."
Yeah.
So you enter just the 5 people in as level 1, but the 2 people with specific projects is a level 2 lead.
Yeah, these are people who have a specific thing. That
Exactly.
for.
5 interested parties, 2 qualified leads, and you set up follow-up dates with them. So instead of just using a calendar, written calendar or Microsoft Outlook calendar, you get Bing or whatever when it's time to go back and follow up with them.
Yeah.
And then you can write down. I don't like to be like, "Oh yeah, I saw your kid is 2 years old today. I wanted to call and say happy birthday." Some
which is a thing that some people do.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Oh, I just wanted to pretend like I cared about your kid for
Exactly.
so we can talk about Windows or whatever.
So I'm not really into salesmanship like that, but I will say, "Oh yeah, last time we spoke, you had that high rise in St. Pete going up."
Right.
And then they'll say, "Oh, actually, the funding didn't work out, but we are starting a new student housing development in Tallahassee, and I do think your product could be a good fit. Here's the architect's name."
Sure.
And you start going down that route, So there is. It's a technical sale. It's a very technical sale that we do.
Meaning that you have to have technical knowledge of what is happening in order to be able to speak the language.
We are not just selling carpet into a house or something like that. We work. The average sales cycle is about 12 to 18 months.
Wow.
So it's not
from first contact to they place an order with you,
right?
Basically,
right.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing actually that your CRM can help you know for sure, because the CRM
it's
records,
easy to not know that.
You
don't have software tracking,
right? 100%
telling you,
yeah. So were you during your education, your formal education, were you kind of learning these different technologies and software things, or is that more stuff that you picked up when you were out in the world?
Software? No, I just. I think my first job, Correct Technologies, it was so cool because one thing that we started doing was manufacturing. So I worked on Kennedy Space Center for about 3 years. My first 3 years after college, UF, excited, graduated, had a Honda Accord, put all of my life's possessions in that Accord on Friday afternoon. I didn't go to my graduation. I never go to graduation stuff. I don't really care about that.
But you graduated.
Exactly. I also don't like birthdays. I'll go on the record for that.
All right. Yeah. Quote me.
Exactly. So I put all my possessions in the Honda Accord, went down to Gainesville, started my job Monday. And I was out there doing
went down from Gainesville to Cape Canaveral?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. And I worked on center for 3 years. And government bureaucracy, you learn a lot about, how to manage your time and how to be professional. But that was not a good fit for my personality. It was frustrating, at times.
Was there a slow pace of?
There's a slow pace, and there's a lot of like check boxes. So like, hey, I wanted to be an engineer too. So I was working really hard. And my manager at one point, just right after shuttle was winding down, space shuttle.
Okay.
So, and Constellation was the follow-on program to take us to Mars by 2030, yada, yada. And then it got canceled, the Augustine Commission, like Feb 1, 2012 or something. They canceled the program during Obama administration. Mm-hmm. And Neil Armstrong actually came out and said, hey, you guys are way over budget. I would not continue to fund this kind of thing. It was a whole thing. And
Neil Armstrong.
Sure, if you're in that world,
right,
major development that you can't do anything about.
It basically ruined what we had been working on for several years at that point. And so I really wanted to advance my career. I was very, very back then. I was very ambitious. And
wait, what do you think you are now?
I just have a lot more fire in the belly. Okay. And so I remember I stayed late, and my manager came up and he said, hey, you really got to remember to pace yourself right now. We don't have like a lot of work to go around. And I remember hearing that. I was like, this is just
don't get too much work done.
Exactly.
Save some for the rest of us.
Nobody wanted to go through layoffs, and they had to do that at the end of shuttle. Sure. So everybody was kind of very cognizant of that. So I just thought, hey, I just didn't like that conversation. Didn't rub me the right way. Luckily, my mentor and boss, Carol, brought me into the headquarters, where I got to learn a lot about how things work behind the scenes as far as writing proposals. And then she took
the business
over
side of things as opposed to the engineering side of things.
Exactly. And that was a great couple years. And they were taking over a manufacturing center at the time. So we had bought all these nice machines and yada, yada, but we didn't know what software we're going to use to kind of manage the workflow. It's ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, or MRP, Manufacturing Resource Planning. No, it's actually not quite the same, but it's basically the same. And like how you would do a route or a job route, or how would you manufacture something on the floor. And so I got all these demos, and that was my first time picking a software program.
Wow.
I picked, it was going to be Fishbowl. It ended up being Shop Tech.
Okay.
Shop Tech. I remember it was like I couldn't believe they let me make that decision. I was like 23.
Did they know who I am?
And I was like,
I just wasted several years.
In retrospect, do you think it was a good decision that you made?
It was definitely a usable software. They had some really powerful softwares that were super expensive. One of them was like an IBM Maximo, they call it, and that one's like $10,000 per
it's
seat.
Like right there
year.
in the name. Yeah, they're not.
Wow.
It's crazy. I mean, it was just
the maximum
so impressive. But like for Boeing, you would need something like that. You have hundreds of thousands of parts that go into every aircraft,
and each one is pretty important.
Exactly. But we were just manufacturing small parts, and it just training on that system might take 3 or 6 months. And that's something that I do. I mean, I'm just so financially conservative, or cheap might even be a better word.
Cheap and loud.
Cheap, man. I just choose the cheapest thing that I think will get the job done.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good guiding principle.
Yeah.
Situation.
Definitely. It's gotten you this far.
As opposed to the most expensive thing that doesn't work is the worst way to do it.
Right. I mean, I had a guy yesterday who came because one of my printers had an issue. He's trying to upsell me to like an $18,000 commercial printer that can do it's 1 cent per page instead of 35 cents per page. He was telling me with my ink printer. Yeah. I was like, I believe you, man, but 18 grand is just too much, man. Like this works. I don't print that many pages.
It's 2019, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's important sometimes, but really not people, most of the time. Not for us.
Wow.
We don't fax. We email everything.
Yeah. So you were with NASA, and I do want to go back to how you got into that.
Sorry, are you still talking about NASA? Because I wanted to ask a question about that before we jump to
I was just going to say, for context, when you said you were frustrated with NASA, you were with NASA as a contractor the entire time?
So I was a contractor, not a civil servant.
Actually, sorry, before you speak about that, because my question fits with that exactly. So it kind of like knock out both things at once.
Yeah.
Okay. We really have to work out a question etiquette, or like a certain way of indicating for each other who's going to ask the next question. But what I wanted to say is, could you elaborate on the relationship between the contractors and NASA and like all of that stuff? Because I would bet that a large portion of our audience thinks if you're doing work for NASA, you must be an employee of NASA or an employee of the federal government or an employee of something like that. And my understanding, and it sounds like this is what you're saying, is you can do work that is NASA work without actually being an employee of NASA. Can you explain for us how that works?
Yeah. So just like defense contractors is the same thing, like at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, there's a lot of Air Force personnel. There's also a lot of contractors down there. I will put this from my perspective, and I'm sure a lot of civil servants will disagree with this. They are more like the planners or the overseers a lot of time. Like
the civil servants are?
The
or the
civil servants.
The actual, and so the civil servant is an employee of the government.
Exactly.
Like the government
right, and
writes the paycheck.
usually it's a
and that person.
GS8, GS9, GS10. Those are pay thresholds. To go from an engineer 1 to an engineer 2, which would be like from a GS9 to 10, I think, you have to have 4 years of experience or 3 years in a master's degree. And it's a very straight line checkbox kind of deal. And if you want to be a GS14, which is pretty high up, you have to do like an exchange program to a different space center, like Goddard or headquarters or Johnson.
And so these are like spelled out requirements that are in some handbook or something somewhere. Yeah,
they're pretty spelled out. And then, well, a lot of times they'll be part of the planning committees. Hey, shuttle's over, Constellation's canceled, SLS is the next program, the Strategic Launch System, Space Launch System maybe. And basically, hey, how 130 metric tons to low Earth orbit or 70 metric tons? What's more important? What's the mission critical elements that we need to do here? Do we want to go to the moon first and then Mars? Or do we, hey, we've already been to the moon. But then they'll say part of the technology readiness level of this new component, it's actually a risk reduction to go to the moon first instead of going straight to Mars. So they are part of like the mission planning group.
So these are the civil servants who are having these conversations.
Exactly.
Like, what are our priorities?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times they'll say, okay, so now the mission's developed. Hey, contractor, go design the actual wing. Go design the thermal protection system. Go design the fuselage. Go do the, propulsion testing. So there's a lot of the engineering, the design and testing a lot of times is done by the contractors, whereas the planning, and that's oversimplified certainly to a large extent because there's a lot of contractors on the planning groups and vice versa.
Sure.
But that was my experience there.
So is your understanding that the civil servant side of things, these people, it's not their focus or expertise to design those things, or they could do that, but for some reason it's more efficient?
The benefit of a lot of times the civil servants get paid less, but there's a lot more job security. So at Kennedy Space Center, I think there were 20,000 employees, 2,000 were civil servants, and 18,000 were contractors. And then after Shuttle, there were 2,000 civil servants and 5,000 contractors.
Wow.
So you get a huge layoff, and it's all the contractors that get laid off.
So is it that the contractors, there might be more of a like short-term engagements? We need you for this right now, but you won't be here necessarily.
5-year contract.
Which is also, again, for the audience, it's kind of a typical aspect of what it's called contract work. There's a specific contract for a specific project. We need this company to do this one specific thing. And then maybe we'll have other contracts down the line, but it's not like a permanent engagement.
As the contractor, you got to go find another contract, maybe with the same people, or maybe you.
Whereas when you're the civil servant, the federal employee, your expectation is, I'm going to have this job.
You will be there for life.
forever.
It's basically impossible to fire a federal employee.
Right.
You have to really do something bad.
And leave evidence behind.
And I got a lot of friends who were contractors with Craig and with other firms that ended up being civil servants. So, I think they're just as happy. I don't think they're less happy but I think that they realize
like
it's
personal
a different,
preference.
Exactly. It's a different type of position sometimes.
And it kind of, to bring it back to your experience, it contrasts heavily with, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but in your company, if you met someone who was 20 years old and had no formal education, but was just super gifted at understanding the acoustics and the math and everything, you could just hire them if you wanted to make them.
Absolutely.
You could make the call and say, I think you have what it takes here.
Yes.
There's no sort of check boxes. That
no check boxes for us.
Right. It's just whatever you want, basically, as the decision maker.
Now, I will say with the HR learning I've been doing, it is smart to be more structured and more. I thought I was so smart and I could tell if somebody had this gift, but I'll tell you a new book and one that I'm a big fan of, not new, but a really interesting one is by John Morgan, the attorney. Oh, okay. It's called You Can't Teach Hungry. And you can teach a lot of technical skills. You can teach people how to set up microphones and how to videotape and edit and stuff like that. But you can't teach somebody to want to work 50 hours a week, or while they're sitting there at the desk to want to work and get stuff done.
Yeah, and to be inquisitive. And that's actually a theme that's come up, I think, in every single talk that we've had. when we ask people, hey, could you boil down what you think is the secret of your success or other people's success? Nearly always the answer could be paraphrased as caring.
Yeah.
Like,
You just have to care
just
about
caring how you're doing. Right.
whether it's your own enterprise or you're an important employee for someone else.
Or you're helping a client, you're helping your company.
You become personally invested in whatever it is you're trying to do, as
Right.
opposed to just clocking in and clocking out.
Showing up on time, asking follow-up questions. If you don't understand something, saying, hey,
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense to me. Can someone please like walk me through this?
Yeah.
Taking the initiative basically seems to be like the bright line that divides.
A big thing we've done to try to make sure that that's in everybody's mind every day
Yeah.
is, as we've grown, we've been able to do have better salaries and benefits like healthcare and 401k and all that stuff. But we also do a bonus program every 6 months, which is 10% of the income that the company makes. We share with all of the operations employees get. So
Wow.
not the salespeople, because they're commission based
They have
to a
their own
large
commission.
extent.
They're
Yeah.
already getting some
They have their
share
own
of
bonus
that
structure.
in the way
Yeah.
their thing works.
But to
But
the guys
everybody
who
else is
don't,
connected
yeah,
to
this
that.
is, hey, don't just, hey, everybody's tired of you not pulling your weight around.
Yeah.
So, or likewise, leading by example. There's a lot. Everybody kind of wants to be part
Yeah.
of that. It's almost like an ESOP, the employee stock ownership program
Yeah.
that Publix has. Publix has like the nicest employees ever because they
Everybody's
all
so
care,
happy.
you know.
Right.
They-
Yeah.
And a lot of them make a lot of money with like
If they're-
no high school education or certainly no college. You
Yeah.
know, but you get in there early, you work hard, you show up on time
Prove
every
yourself
day.
as an employee.
You're professional.
and You're engaged with it.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can retire at a relatively early age, you know, without
Yeah.
a formal education.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said for bonus programs and ESOPs because it gets everybody aligned with their incentives.
Yeah. So this is also interesting.
Yeah, it really is.
Another, like,
Well, and it's
Yeah.
so one of the things that I really wasn't planning that the podcast would sort of get into, but it kind of has for each episode. And this one certainly falls into that, is this exploration of just different business models. You know, you can work as a government employee, you can work as a government contractor, you can work as an entrepreneur, not a word,
yeah.
entrepreneur, startup. You know, you can work in a big company, in a small company, doing retail, doing sales, doing, you know, all of
Yeah.
these different kinds of things. And so, yeah, thank you very much for explaining to us
Yeah.
just your
A lot
take
of
on the
those
whole like
different
contractor
channels.
government
Yeah.
thing.
So yeah, one thing there's two things I definitely want to cover in the limited time we have left.
Sure.
One of them is, so, you know, let's say you're 15, you're in high school, you're thinking about your future. As you mentioned, you knew you wanted to do something, you wanted to start your own company. I think you said you had sort of a general interest in engineering at this point.
That it would be an
I
engineering
love physics. I don't know. Did you? Who was our physics teacher back?
I
in,
had Hegeman.
Hegeman. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. He was kind of a
The
grumpy man,
crotchety
dude. He
guy,
was
but
grumpy.
likable for sure. Interesting. I mean, it was a cool class.
I love physics. I liked math and I love physics, and so I just
Did that start in high school
Yep,
with that
definitely.
teacher, or
Yeah. Actually, before him, even Mr. Scott, if you had him,
Jake
by
Scott?
chance. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
He's a
I made the
friend of
man.
mine and an awesome dude.
Yeah.
Do you still
I
keep
didn't-
in touch with him?
Yeah, yeah. I
Oh,
haven't
dude,
seen him in a little bit
give me
'cause
his
he moved.
contact
I will
info
do
because
that.
I want him
He
to
actually
listen to
came
this.
up at another
Yeah, he
thing
did.
briefly
Yeah.
because he did a
He gave a
cool
TED Talk.
a TED Med
Gotcha.
thing. Yeah.
I want to give him a shout out and let him know, hey, you are
Man,
partially
he would be
responsible
so happy
for,
because he loves physics so much.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to phrase
He's
that.
the man. He's the
It's
man.
so interesting. It's so cool. Yeah, that's awesome. So would you say that love of, you know, that interest in that subject kind of came, you know,
From
you became
those
aware of
teachers?
it in those,
at a relatively early age. I don't know if it's any specific teacher, although
Yeah.
we just mentioned some very important ones.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just liked it. I think it's fun. I think
Yeah.
it's interesting to be able to explain the world in very concrete
it's
terms.
so,
you know,
literally tangible. Everything
Right.
around you
Is there, it's
yeah.
physical, like it's
Yeah.
right there in the word.
Yeah.
Is there, sort of on the flip side, are there subjects that you don't like or never liked, possibly because of not great teachers?
nothing jumps out. I mean, so we all went to Stanton for.
We
do
did.
people know
All
that on
same
the
high school.
podcast?
It's
already?
come up another.
I think they probably
Okay.
will.
I don't think
Yeah.
we mentioned it here. Yeah.
Stanton's awesome. I mean,
Absolutely.
honestly, UF is a
It's a really
top-notch
special place.
public university, and
was
Columbia is one of the top universities in the world. But
Yeah.
Stanton was the smartest people I ever met were at Stanton.
Absolutely.
You
I
know?
agree 100%.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that happened.
How did that
It was a
happen?
magnet school, but there's other magnet schools, and I don't think somehow they didn't.
We all cared. Like we all
That was a big
tried. It
part
was
of it. It's the same
competitive,
theme.
but
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a
we
bunch
all,
of kids who like thought
Yeah.
it was cool to be interested in stuff and do things.
Totally.
And then teachers who I think fed off of that and vice versa.
Yeah.
It was an amazing environment. I don't know how it came together, but
Mhm.
I hope they're still doing it. I hope it happens. in
Yeah,
other
I hope it's
schools.
happening
It was really
somewhere.
cool.
Right.
Yeah.
So as you said, English teachers that really had high expectations.
Mhm,
You know,
totally.
and would you say that in your background, in your family, like education was emphasized as this is important, you need to work hard, or
My folks were both attorneys. They really let us do our own thing a lot, like as far as education goes. My brother was in your grade, and so you knew him. And an advantage for me early on was when he was doing his flashcards, like 12 times 12 kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I was a year and a half younger, so I was learning it when I was like 5 or 6,
kind of had a head
7
start
or 8.
on
Yeah.
that stuff.
So I totally got to kind of learn
Leapfrog a
things
little
ahead
bit.
of time.
Yeah.
As a fellow younger brother, yeah,
Exactly.
you're
It's a big
exposed
benefit.
to-
I mean, honestly, it really is.
Whereas we
As,
just drag them down.
As an older brother, looking back, I can see, it would be a benefit.
Interesting. And then you went to UF. Do you remember when you were applying for schools, were you stressed out about test prep or GPA or admissions? Like, what was your experience?
So, test prep, for one thing, I just love practice tests. I mean, like, that's what I do is like,
not everybody will say that.
Sorry, this is, I don't know how long I've been doing this, quite a while. You're the first person I've ever say that.
I mean, like, as a preparation, like, tool. Like,
Oh, okay.
But if I have to take a test, I want the practice test. I don't even want to look at anything else. I want to know what is exactly, maybe not the exact questions, but the exact type of questions.
Yeah.
That's
And that's a very engineering way to look at it. Like, how do you deconstruct this problem? Which is actually how we.
And it's also
that's how we
pretty
look at
fundamental to our approaches.
Yeah,
You got to
is
look
that-
at exactly the kind of thing you're going to have on test day. Take the time to
And the
understand
test
it.
is,
And
in a sense, a product designed for a purpose. What is that purpose, and how does it achieve that goal? What are its constraints? All those.
Which
So
is very
that's
much
kind of how you looked at it.
engineering
It sounds like.
situation.
Yeah.
So
And I was always a math guy, so I always did well on the math stuff. I don't have a great vocabulary because I never really read that much growing up. That was before Harry Potter, I think. And like, I mean, I just
Harry
didn't
Potter.
really. I play a lot of video games, but like I didn't read.
Yeah.
And I play a lot of sports, so like.
So that's, sorry if I could interrupt you, because we talked about you reading in general, like, now in your sort of real life. Was the thing that flipped that reading switch realizing that reading could help you like
Maybe.
objectively learn stuff, or was it something else?
I think it was in college at UF freshman year. I mean, college you have so much free time.
You do a surprising amount for a lot of
compared to high school.
Well,
I mean,
especially
compared to
high
high
school,
school.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll give you my pitch or my thought on college versus technical school. Don't let me
Love to
leave
hear
that
that.
one because I
Yeah.
think that's really interesting. But
Yeah.
I read On the Road by Jack Kerouac, which is like a super interesting book. And I was
At what age?
probably 18 or 19, and I was like, whoa, that's great literature.
perspective
That is,
That's just
an American
phenomenal
classic
stuff.
for sure.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, I didn't realize there were actually really good books like that.
I
out
can
there.
enjoy.
Isn't that amazing? Sorry, this just, I know we're running out of time, but it's just a pet peeve as someone who loves like language, literature, all that kind of stuff. It's so frustrating. It's not your fault at all. It's not really
I
anyone's
feel
fault.
like I am at fault here.
No. It's so frustrating that like you're obviously very intelligent. You're motivated to read. You love reading. You're clearly physically capable of it.
Yeah.
And you went to this school that like was trying to emphasize reading, and they just couldn't put anything in front of you that you wanted.
Well,
to
it was
read.
all
Not just this school, but
right.
No, I know. And then like you
It
get out of
was
school. and you're like,
Chinua Achebe kind
I
of
know,
stuff,
yeah.
or
Things
it
fall
was
apart, which is just relatable. It wasn't. Yeah, I remember reading that.
to expect a 16-year-old to
And-
relate to that.
Yeah,
if they
and I
haven't-
don't know if they had put the perfect book in front of us. I don't know that we would have been in a mindset, because when you have to do it and you have to do it by Thursday,
Right.
and you have
Anything you
3
have
other
to
projects
do
to do,
must
like,
not be
like
valuable,
a
because if it were
separate
valuable,
piece.
you would never.
Like
Yeah.
I actually went back and
There
read
are
that a
books
few
for
years ago
sure.
later. I was like, actually, that was a really good book.
Yeah,
So I was like just an idiot back then.
yeah.
Well, that-
there
a
were books I
similar
read in
thing-
college that I enjoyed much more.
I
Yeah.
really admire a lot of Robert Frost's poetry now. You really have to be an adult and like go
Yeah.
through some things.
Yeah,
Why would you make a 15-year-old read it?
absolutely.
It doesn't
All
help
Quiet
at
on the
all.
Western Front, I reread in college for another class,
Yeah.
and I got so much more out of it
Yeah.
compared to when I read it in high school. And I was
Because
just,
you
I
can
gotta get
actually
through this.
understand that people go to
So
wars.
maybe
and it's like a real
Chinua
thing.
Achebe, maybe that book is great, but at the time
It
it was
is
just, I'm not
a classic. Like it is a great
It's
book.
considered to be, absolutely,
but you
but
can't
I
understand it
definitely,
if
as a
you-
teenager, and it's funny how often you look back on something as an adult. Man, if I could just go to school and learn about American history now,
Yeah.
I'd be so into that.
Right.
And at the time, there's a limit to what
So anyway, I didn't mean
Yeah.
to divert that,
Yeah.
but it's so interesting.
Yeah.
Like you are clearly like someone who
has a capacity to
appreciates
appreciate that.
reading
Yeah.
in a variety of ways. Yeah, and it's just such a sad thing
Yeah.
that like the reading you had to do
Yeah.
did not spark
Just,
that.
yeah, it
Well,
wasn't that
yeah.
interesting to me.
So you took the practice tests. you did well enough on the test? I mean, you got the score you wanted.
I basically got all the math ones right. I mean, because that's what I was good at.
Yeah,
and then
sure.
the English one, like, okay, yeah. I mean, okay, I got maybe like a C plus.
Yeah,
okay,
whatever
good
the
enough. And
yeah.
I wanted to go to UF. I think I knew it was definitely a good enough score to get into UF, and the GPA and going to Stanton was good enough.
The whole package worked out.
I was
Because
like,
that's
hey.
one of the, again, for the audience, for some universities, especially private ones, and especially more selective ones, like, the ones you could think of as the most prestigious schools or whatever.
Yeah.
For a lot of those schools, the process is not very transparent on how you get in. You need a certain GPA, you need a certain score, you need certain things, but that's not all you need. There's other stuff.
Yeah.
With large state schools, it's way more clear. They make it pretty clear if you score this and this and this.
Above 1270 and
You're
above
pretty much
3.2.
going to get in, right? At the time, that's what it was. Yeah. So you could know, I have the score, I have the grades. I'm basically almost certainly going to get in if I apply to these schools.
So your admissions experience, you pretty much knew you wanted to go.
Yeah, I did early admission, and I thought about doing some like Ivy League stuff or like some Dukes or whatever, but at the end of the day, it was free at the time because it was
cheap.
Exactly.
And that's a great.
I mean, it was free because of Bright Futures,
which was an in-state program. Yeah, basically, if you had certain grades, certain test scores, and those kinds of things, then
you have to look at what is the cost benefit. Even back then, I was doing that, and I was like, hey, it's basically free to go to the school. It's number 6 public school in the U.S. Sure. A lot of my friends are going there. I want to go there. I love the Gators. I'm wearing a Gator shirt right now.
Cups. Yeah.
I didn't even notice. These are the school colors.
I only let us use blue and orange markers in the conference room. That's a fact. Wow. It's a weird thing. I just love the Gators. Where he was going. Yeah.
That's great.
But so my trade school thought is...
I wanted to get that. Yeah, please. Thank you.
I think it's so important to think about what you want to do because there's a lot of private schools. A lot of people go and get like... I did this exchange program through Rotary Club for like 6 weeks. And I was with this guy who went to a FIT, I think. And as far as I know, it's a really good school. I mean, it's a really good engineering program, aerospace engineering especially. But he paid a lot of money and ended up doing like industrial psychology or something like that. And his grad school alone was like 50 or 60 grand. He was coming out making 35 or 40. Yeah. He's like, man, it's going to take me like 10 years to pay off.
A while to pay that off. And that's assuming that he keeps his job and all that kind of stuff.
And in the meantime, you're not like enjoying
saving anything or traveling or whatever.
Because a lot of people, several years into their career, they're like, oh, I actually don't like this. And then you got to go do something else. And then now you're still
hopefully they'll hear this podcast and then decide to do something else.
But anyway, so please continue.
Well, so after my time on the Space Center, working in the manufacturing plant afterwards, we did a lot of aerospace manufacturing. So 5-axis machining on mills and lathes. And it's basically making precision aluminum or titanium parts. Or what was the Inconel? It's like a nickel alloy, like very specific stuff because you can't fly an airplane with steel because it's just too heavy. So you need like really strong stuff, a high strength to weight ratio.
It's like you mentioned earlier with the curtains you want to list. What are the priorities?
Exactly.
Sure. Strength, weight,
100%.
Whatever it is.
Kind of funny. I never really put those two together, but actually it's the exact same thing.
Same analysis for airplane parts or for window noise blocking curtains.
And so one thing we had such a hard time staffing, and I have a hard time here at my current commercial acoustics, is finding skilled employees. Because everybody wants to go to school and be an IT guy, or everybody wants to go to a 4-year university. We were hiring 3-axis machinists with high school degrees, and that went and did like a 6-month or 1 year. What do you call it? Not fellowship, but
like I get us a certificate,
like an apprenticeship, basically.
Exactly.
Still call it that, or is it go by?
That's what we would call it.
Oh wow,
yep.
Okay.
And
so this was not your current company. This was back
at Craig Tech.
With the Craig Tech.
Yep. And we were hiring for like 45, 50 grand. These kids were like 18 or 19 years
old. They had just done these programs.
And the beautiful thing is they get done with their 8-hour shift and they go home. They don't have email on their phone. Like it's not like our life, where it never really is.
There's always the possibility that somebody's trying to reach you.
Right. Another beautiful thing about that is if you go through one of those programs and you get, one of those jobs in the field, if you see, gosh, I really love this and I would love to do like more higher level abstract stuff, then great, you can go get a degree in it and do that. But you'll know beforehand that you love it.
And not even degrees as much as like training seminars. So like then you can do 5-axis machining, which is not just like left, right, up, down, forward, back. You can also turn the mill.
Rotational.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So then you can start doing really cool stuff that I couldn't do. And I was watching these guys, like I was part of the manufacturing planning or engineering, but like I couldn't actually run the mill. I didn't know how to do that. And so these guys were making like 3 times as much as I was.
They can use them.
And they were like my age or a little bit older. And we couldn't find anybody to take their place. And these guys like plumbing, welding, machining, all these great careers.
These are paths you can and should consider.
Absolutely.
I just actually, funny enough, so a little anecdote here is I got my low voltage license recently because the sound masking we were doing, I didn't recognize that's actually recently, like about 8 years ago, Florida changed the law. South Carolina and most of the other states in the Southeast don't do this. But like anything that goes into a wall that you have to plug in somewhere has to be installed by a low voltage certified electrician. Well, we didn't know that. So I had to go get my low voltage license. And that's not really a super easy thing to do, but now we can do there's no low voltage guys around, you know? So like there's all this work. And if somebody could, come to you have to have 3 years of management experience in low voltage, which I was just barely able to clear that hurdle, or 4 years of work in the field and then sit for this test. And I just did a lot of test prep for this one, it was 2 weeks ago. And the same types of approaches, by the way. I mean, the exact same as the FAT.
Get some sample questions.
Tons of sample questions. But I guess my point is that I strongly encourage people who aren't certain that they want to go do something very specific at a university to consider getting a real job first, not just delivering food or whatever, but getting a real job and seeing what you like. Because sometimes you're too young to know what you like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, another thing, I've heard this actually from several former clients. When they were younger in high school and college, they really thought they wanted to work with people. And then they start doing it. And they're like, oh God.
Then they met some people.
And I personally do enjoy working with people, or else we wouldn't do the things that we do. But it's
a person-to-person difference.
Right. You have to have a very specific skill set to be able to deal with just any random person walking into a store or a restaurant or whatever. And if you gear up for a career dealing with people all the time, and then you meet your first 100 people and don't like 60 of them.
Or you're not comfortable in that situation or whatever.
Right. Absolutely.
Can you describe like what is your normal day like, your normal week? When you get up in the morning, what's your experience? Just
so there's like this platitude everybody says: stop working in your business, start working on your business. So like as the chief engineer, I still have to do a lot of consulting, a lot of site visits, things like that. But rather than going and doing it myself now, I'm trying to train people to do certain parts of my job, like become like a force multiplier. Essentially is, hey, I used to do all the accounting. Now, Chloe, who you met briefly, does most of our bookkeeping. Like I'll still do the financial reports and the tax accounting and stuff like that. I work on with a tax CPA, but I'm able to kind of outsource and just do most of my time is training now. Training and auditing is a big thing. I put together this big master process book because sometimes Casey will put a signed quote in the signed quotes folder, but name it this way. And then Mark will do it this way and I'll do it this way. And it's like, we're reusing numbers or like, and now we can't invoice for it. And now it's a whole thing. So industrial engineering that helps me a lot is breaking down the process. Is what does everybody do day in and day out? Okay, where are the inefficiencies? Why are
their redundancies?
So many.
So understanding and improving the day-to-day processes of your business is a big part of what you're doing.
Absolutely. And I'm still very involved. Like I'll still do a lot of the purchase orders. But Chloe can't. Now she can do a lot of them, like 95% of them. So training, I'm still kind of. My wife will say I hold it together with duct tape and super glue. There's a lot of still doing the actual work, but stopping doing everything and spending your time training, and then hiring is a big thing. HR is just so critical, and I don't mean sexual harassment or like
a lot of HR stuff you think of.
Right. Yeah. Like, hey, he's bothering me. Oh, hey, he got violent at work. There was drugs in the workplace. They're not that kind of HR. I'm talking about people development, HR, giving them a plan. Here's what I want you to do over it. What do you want to be in 5 years? Okay. Well, here's a 1 year plan. Here's what I need you to do so you can be part of our organization.
That everybody's on the same page.
And that's something else to kind of just quickly jump back. You've mentioned it before.
And I can run a little bit long. Just
tell us.
Yeah, we'll talk to you literally.
I'll give you like a 2 minute table when it's
time. But one of the things that I think a lot of our audience is maybe also not aware of, you as a business owner, or even just really anyone in the management capacity, anyone who's hiring people, you know that it's actually really hard to find a talented, intelligent, driven young person, and you want to find them. You need to find them, and it's very hard to do. And to do it in a sense where, or with a level of certainty, a level of confidence that, yes, this actually is a person who's going to be here 3 years from now, 5 years from now. It's hard to find those people. Tell me if you disagree with that, but I think what a lot of our audience maybe doesn't recognize is that, again, it comes back to being personally invested in something, showing up on time, trying to learn, trying to be useful. Your HR issues, in a sense, kind of revolve around that. How do you find and train and retain those people? And so you want to find them in the first place, right? Yes. And that's not easy.
It's so funny. It's almost like the dating scene. Like somebody's like, man, there's just no good guys out there. And all my guys friends are like, man, I just can't find a decent girl. It's like,
yes,
there's
how are
lots
these people
of
not connected?
Exactly. And I like both of them. I'm like, it seems like a good fit. But like with employers and employees, so many employees or potential like students, potential employees, they're like, I just can't find a decent job. And employers like, I can't find the right worker. Yeah. Nobody shows up to work on time. It's expectations, clear expectations, especially early on. Very first day, if something's not right, you tell them right then. If it's not fixed the second day, it's a problem. Yeah. If you're 10 minutes late the first day, and it depends how tight of a ship you want to run, of course. Sure. For software developers, it's a little different than salespeople or customer service, but there's also the ultimate challenge is as a small business owner, you're fighting the big businesses with the bigger compensation packages oftentimes. And we like to say it's not the big that eats the small, it's the fast that eats the slow. So we try to be very agile and grow quickly. And part of what I'm doing is I'm selling the dream to some extent. I'm trying to sell this vision of here's where we are now.
When you're looking to hire an employee.
Exactly. Hey, I can offer you this now, but we just grew 100% last year.
Yeah.
And we're growing like this. I want you to be part of our future.
You're getting in early.
Exactly.
Something that's going to be bigger than it is now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So by selling the vision, you have to make sure that you're achieving the vision at least as closely as possible. Because
for now,
exactly. And luckily we've been able to outpace our goals the last, 18 to 24 months. We're 5 years in but it's a challenge. That's maybe what brings some of the stress in is because you're even if you're growing, the question is, are you growing fast enough, to keep everybody super engaged? Luckily, we've had very low turnover. The people who fit in, we've been able to reward and they've grown almost as quickly as the company has. People who don't fit in or who don't work out, we have a process for that. And we call it the opportunity for improvement. And it's an OIC form. And I say, hey, you're not meeting our expectations. Here's how. And you have two opportunities to fix it up. And you have a follow-up date. Boom. Here's the follow-up date.
It's happening. Yeah.
Hey, you're still not. And that's Jack Welch 100%. He is like, hey, be brutally honest, because you're not being ethical. You're being unethical by not telling
You're wasting your time and their time.
Right.
If
because they, in theory, and that's also kind of like dating, they could be doing better, thriving in a different environment.
Yeah.
The longer you keep.
And when you lay somebody off without any warning, they are blindsided, and they're just like mentally, emotionally, financially, they're not ready. They haven't been preparing for that.
Whereas if they've met with you a couple times and they know there's issues,
at least they're not shocked by it.
Here's what I'm not doing well. Here's what you're not doing well. It's just not working. Hey, I want to give you one more chance, but so HR should not be all negative, but you want,
its purpose is sort of to deal with the negative things, I would think, because the positive things don't really need to be addressed so much.
Right. Yeah. But and training and growth opportunities and that kind of thing. It's so many moving parts, but I have to say Winning by Jack Welch, just basically I model all of my HR practices off that book.
So it's interesting when I said, what is your day-to-day life like? What is your work week like? I think almost everything you mentioned was kind of office administrative, accounting, people, processes, as opposed to how do I block sound coming through here? Is it kind of the case that in the earlier years you were working on the actual engineering problems? Now those are mostly addressed and it's more just implementing your product and getting it out there.
So we're still doing some product development and we manufacture here. So a lot of it's quality improvement in our manufacturing process. Okay. First piece inspections, just determining what is good versus not good. That's a tricky thing sometimes. It's the same panel to two different clients gets very different reactions. And it's just crazy.
That's interesting. Yeah.
It's expectation. So some of it is closed loop feedback to the salesperson. Hey, you shouldn't sell this type of panel at eye height. This panel needs to be higher, whereas this type of panel can be right in somebody's face, wood frame versus resin hardened versus whatever. So we're doing a lot of learning, still every single day.
Would you say that for the most part, you're in this office looking at a computer screen? Like that's like, a certain percentage
50-50. I do spend a lot of time out in the field still with architects. Hey, why is it so noisy in this apartment? You see all my testing equipment over there. I'll fly out to Seattle, Chicago, New York once or twice a month to go do field testing. And people pay a lot of money for that because it's not super easy to do. There's not a ton of acoustic consultants nationwide. There's only maybe 150 of them. So we get work all over the country.
So are you doing those lunch and learns, as you mentioned, in those other parts of the country, or is that more local?
Yeah, how do they find you?
Yeah, AIA, you have to pay a lot more for like a passport license or whatever registration. So we stopped doing that this year. We only give licenses in Florida, or only give credits in Florida.
So you have enough going on locally.
Exactly. And we gave a lot of lunch and learns, and it just, although it gets the word out there and it helps people understand, hey, there's this super unique product. And when I talk about the product, I'll give you my quick plug here.
Yeah, sure.
Is the wall blocker, our flagship product line, used to be used for automotive. And basically, instead of doubling up drywall, you take away multiple layers of drywall, put one layer of this on the studs of the wall, and it breaks that structure-borne link between the drywall, the gypsum, and then the stud itself. So now the drywall is kind of floating off the wall, and it adds a lot of mass, which is what the architect's trying to do when he adds the drywall on. But he doesn't realize, or the contractor, whoever, that it's not the right thing to do. So that is, we partner with an automotive manufacturer. We really got rid of a lot of our product lines, reinvested heavily in that. I spent a lot of my time going and doing field testing to prove that our product works, or to show them where they need it. A lot of times we won't test our own product because there is a conflict of interest there.
So but
hey, here's how this room's doing. Get somebody else to come test our room, and we'll see how it works. So
I do want to ask also, and again, let us know as soon as you need to leave. Sure. What do you hope for in the future? What's your vision for next year, 10 years from now? Do you hope to sell the company one day? Do you want to expand it to other areas?
Do you have like a concrete exit strategy in mind?
No exit strategy is set. We did bring on investors about 3 years ago. So it started out with the $3,000. My parents, like a couple years after that, when we were making $200K in revenue, put in 10 to 15K. And they are still investors in the company. And then we got some kind of institutional investors, very small shop, but wealthy family investment and they got a really nice return on it so far. So I think they're really happy with it.
Are these people that you knew already, or how did you?
I met them through one of our sales reps. She had met them through family connections. Hey, you should meet Walker, and you should meet these guys. And it was just a good meeting. We just kind of recognized we were both hungry to grow the business.
Which you can't do.
I was going to say.
Right.
Hungry.
And, I don't believe in growth at any expense. Like, profitability is super important for us. Like, we're not a software firm that like Twitter or whatever that can be just negative for 10 straight.
Somehow just completely tank all the time.
And I'll tell you, software, a great book right here for one more book is Peter Thiel, From Zero to One, talks about technology. We both talk about tech companies. Everybody thinks software. He's like, there's nothing less technologically advanced than software. Like, hey, you're typing in numbers in the computer terminal. Like, that's not technology. Technology is material advancement, material science.
That's true. Like,
stealth technology.
Put a person on Mars. That's
right. I mean, that's not software that's putting us on Mars. New propulsion technologies, new structural techniques so that you can fly a spacecraft that far. New biomedical approaches so that you can keep people alive with enough food there.
Active in the physical world, which may rely on software systems to some extent.
That's a piece of the puzzle, but that's not it.
Exactly. And so that's his big thing. And I believe strongly that we have this new type of material technology. And our grandiose vision, we all sat together last year. I had somebody come in and talk to the whole team. We're maybe 10 or 12 of us at our house at the time. And we did what's called the Vision Quest, which everybody thought that we were going to go smoke peyote.
I was going to say,
out of the desert, half of you come back.
Exactly. Yeah, the week, leave the week. Yeah, strong survive. But we did that at my house, and just had the Vision Quest. I should say.
We did all that.
And had this awesome vision of 2025. What should the company look like? Our grandiose vision is we want to change the way buildings are built. And if there's ever drywall touching drywall for purposes of blocking sound, something went wrong. That's
like anywhere in the world.
Yes,
pretty much.
yes, anywhere in the world. If you putting drywall on drywall to
You've
block
made a
sound,
mistake,
something went
basically.
wrong.
Yeah.
And you'd be amazed. You go up and down the street, it happens in every single building.
Wow.
Every single building, people are wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars putting drywall on drywall for block sound.
Yeah.
Because it's just this thing that they think is a good thing. And it's like, that's not
Yeah.
a good way to do it. So we're re-educating the construction marketplace of don't do that. Don't do what you've always done. Well, don't fix what ain't broke. They'll say, well, it is broken. You just don't know.
Don't know.
Yeah.
It's always been broken.
Right. And then you move on. And when the tenants move in, then it's too late. And they're bitching at their property
missed the
management
window.
group and the construction firm's already on the next project.
Yeah.
So it is broke. You just don't know it's broke.
Yeah. So would you say then that to get there, your challenge is more of a marketing education one and not an engineering one? So
Yes. It's a modes and methods sale. We're not just selling a different type of drywall or a different color carpet. We're changing the way they build the buildings.
Yeah, this is an aspect of this that you are not addressing, and you don't know that you're not addressing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you don't know what you don't know. And they're at first they're like, whoa. I'm like, yes, this is what I do.
We do all the time.
and you have to approach it with a certain level of modesty because,
For sure.
hey, what we tell architects, you guys know thousands of codes. We only know 2.
Yeah.
The Florida building code is 1207.2 and 3. And that's all we know.
Yeah.
You know,
We
you
know
guys
it really
know
well.
everything, but we know it well. You
And
know?
also, sorry, just as a pause for the audience, when you're talking about these codes,
Yeah, sure.
the codes are documents basically put out by the government in some capacity that say if you're building a thing in this physical area, this jurisdiction that we control, like the state of Florida, or a city could have codes or whatever.
Exactly.
If you're building a thing where this code applies, then these are the
You have to
rules
follow
and
these
specifications
rules.
for how that has to be built. And so you're saying the contractor's like, look, I know thousands of codes, or you're saying to them, you know thousands of codes, I only know the 2 parts of the code that
Right. And you
apply to-
think you're meeting the code and you're not.
Right.
You're
And then
overlooking
once the
it.
time comes, the complaints happen. They call in a consultant to test it. Hey, actually, you're short of the code. How do we fix it? There ain't no fixing it.
right.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
Just
too
knock
late to
it down.
fix.
Yeah.
Without just
Wow.
knocking everything down
You
and
have
doing it
to
again,
go.
which you
Yeah,
can't.
exactly.
Yeah.
So certain things you can fix afterwards. Restaurants and churches, you can add acoustic panels. But when it comes
other
to room-to-room
environments-
transition or
Yeah.
sound transmission, there is no fixing it. It's
Wow.
it's start from scratch.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
All right. Well, I know you do have to get going. You have a
Yeah.
meeting after this,
This
but thank
is
you so much.
Beyond
Very,
useful.
very
Thank you very
interesting,
much.
Very helpful.
Yeah, I think
Thanks
you're
for
going
having
to
us.
help
I
a lot
enjoyed
of
it.
people.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you very
Alright.
much. Welcome.
All right.
thanks a lot, guys.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks.
So yeah, once again, a very, very sincere thank you to Walker for taking the time to sit with us and go over a lot of stuff. One thing that I really found interesting about his, just that entire interview really was the way that he approached so many things from a very structured way of thinking, I guess. And I guess that probably, I don't know if it was something that comes directly from his engineering training, or is it more the case that he was drawn to engineering because that's how he thinks about things anyway? Either way, probably like a feedback loop kind of reinforcement thing. But I found it really interesting the way that he had processes for all kinds of stuff. And he was aware of formulas for different, things, even things that he hadn't done in a long time. He's like, oh, yeah, I remember the name of that formula was blah, blah, blah. And it kind of worked like this. Just a very disciplined way of thinking. And it's very interesting to me that can be applied in so many different domains. He can apply it to hiring and training and a bunch of things that are sort of outside of the limited scope of engineering. Not that engineering is limited, but you know what I mean? Outside of specifically building his product and doing those kinds of product related things, he's also able to apply that disciplined mentality to every aspect really of his professional life.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. It is definitely, like you said, sort of a chicken or the egg kind of situation. Was it his own inborn natural inclination to do that, or did he kind of pick that up as he went along? And I think, like you said, it's probably a combination of the two. But yeah, a lot of times we asked a question and I thought, it was like, oh, why'd you do this or that? I thought it'd be like, oh, I just kind of, it was my gut feeling. It was like, nope, I wrote this down. I did this.
He's like, nope, here's my list of things. I gave each thing a score. I added up all the sub scores and then I had to do X.
Yeah, that was just like, oh, like I could see how that would be very effective and very useful. And I love the process of, we wanted to start a business. We came up with all these ideas and we gave them scores, the top 3. Like it was a logical process. It's not like you wouldn't have had to have special training to come up with that. But I think it's that mindset, like you said, that he kind of already has probably and has had it reinforced by using it successfully. It makes a ton of sense. It was pretty simple. It was, I think, 2 or 3 scores, then the aggregate of those, and then just take your best shot at, as a simple early version of each of these things. And obviously,
yeah,
it was effective. Yeah.
And some other interesting takeaways, for all of these interviews, I am always of the opinion that even if you don't specifically want to go into the field of the person that we're interviewing, it's still helpful for you to know how that part of the world works. How, in the case of, this last interview, how startups work, how NASA works, how being a government contractor can work, all of these kinds of things. Even if you don't go into those fields, now you'll have a better idea of how that does work. And you will be surprised as you become an old person like us. You'll be surprised how often it's actually useful to know those types of details. And they come a lot closer to your own career than you would expect that they will at this point. Just to name a couple of those things, differences between B2B marketing and B2C marketing. That's a thing that comes up really across a whole bunch of different industries. Government contractors, civil servants. That's hard to say.
Not really. That's not.
Civil. Oh no, you're right.
Yeah.
So civil servants and how they. Oh wait, I did it again. No, but civil servants, how they differ from contractors. Nice. Say again.
Nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All of those types of distinctions are things that we'll certainly touch on or will be touched on by a lot of people's careers listening to this, even if they don't actually go into those direct fields. One other thing, he had 2 or 3 quotes that I was really, really impressed by. And a couple of them go back to some of the themes that we've seen over and over again in our other interviews. My favorite one was, "You can't teach hungry." It was really interesting point.
Yeah, absolutely. Though, I mean, that certain things like stick in your mind. You're like, oh yeah, that's
and it goes back to what we've said about how it may be hard to believe this if you're a young person listening to this, but business owners, managers, all kinds of people out there in the world, they want to find and hire dedicated, hardworking, passionate young people who can help their enterprises grow, and it's very hard to find those people.
Yeah, it reminded me, I think at one point he said it's kind of like the dating scene. Like you have female friends who are like, there's no good guys out there. And then like other people are like, I can't find, like you have all these people sort of out there trying to find each other. Right. And there's definitely people looking for jobs. You're thinking, man, I just want to go to a company where I'll be like appreciated. And I have that drive, but I feel like where I've been so far has been not what I'm looking for. And then you have the companies who are, oh man, we just want to find these, young employees who will stick around and work hard and everything. And I think part of that is just, maybe you'll find that company on your first shot, but probably it's going to be a few companies in, a few jobs in, and to kind of make that part of your goal is to do the best you can where you are, if only for yourself, even if you don't like the situation very much. Like you can work on your own skills. You can, maybe it's a similarly unhappy coworker who one day says to you, hey, I found this other place and it's way better and you should come along. You don't know where that's going to come from. So I would say, it's hard to make a general statement for every single person, but mostly, it makes sense to kind of do the best in the situation where you find yourself and keep looking for that match, because there are absolutely companies out there who understand the value of, if we treat our people better and appreciate the work they do, they'll stick around and, we'll all be better off, basically.
Yeah. And similarly, a lot of what we talk about is aimed at people, honestly, maybe kind of people like us, people who are more apt to want to get involved in something and invest themselves in it and really, make a contribution to an employer or to a team. But if you're on the other end of that spectrum and you're thinking, oh gosh, the last thing that I want to do is work in that kind of way, which is, we're laughing, but it's a totally fine way to feel. It is actually how the majority of people feel. They're not like super fired up about their jobs. Useful to know too, that was sort of how Walker described a lot of the people that he worked with, in his government capacity, how he had a manager come around and say, hey, stop working so hard. You're taking all the
slow down.
Right? You're taking all the work for the other people. There is certainly a large portion of the economy and a large portion of the human population that views work in that way. And that's totally fine. We're not saying that you shouldn't view it that way.
Yeah, I think a major goal of ours, maybe the major goal of ours in this podcast, is not to tell you what to do, but we hope that we can give you the best information, the most information we can about what's out there, so you can make an intelligent well-informed choice based on what you hopefully learn from these episodes and what you know about yourself. And if you know what, I'm like not that driven, and maybe you want to find a job, that is more friendly or open to that kind of a situation. And that's similar to what Mike was saying before. Even if you weren't thinking of going into this exact field, you might observe like, oh, it seems like the people who worked in this circle, in this sphere, in this, industry have this way of doing things that matches, more with my personality. Maybe that's something that, I should look into.
Yeah. And from a work-life balance standpoint, there is a lot to be said for those kinds of jobs, whether they're government jobs, NGOs in some cases, whatever it might be. There's a lot to be said for not having to think about your work when you are not actually doing it. Like a lot of the more sort of driven, growth-oriented jobs do sort of involve kind of constantly thinking about the thing that you do professionally, even when you're not actually doing it. And that can certainly be stressful. It's not a thing that everybody wants to do. Also, when Walker was talking about job security, it kind of all plays into that as well. There are jobs you can get that are lower stress. The manager will tell you not to work that hard. You'll have higher job security. That is certainly a thing. It happens not to be the thing that we're super interested in, just personality-wise, but it's absolutely out there. It's definitely a valid way to find fulfillment if that's the kind of thing you like to do. It certainly exists.
Yeah, another thing I want to mention earlier, when we were talking about Walker's whole system for, evaluating his different options and everything. So when he would use that system, so often, I think Mike and I have certainly encountered this, and I think most people who have spent some time in the workforce have encountered this. There are often a lot of, sometimes relatively simple, sometimes not, systems in place that can help you make decisions and solve problems and that sort of thing. And a lot of people just don't use them, And the fact that Walker was able to, I'm sure there's more than he mentioned, but he certainly seemed to have several simple, basic kinds of analysis that he would come back to and use. And that's such a big difference. It's one thing to kind of know that. And it's another thing to consistently say, oh, I can do this analysis and that can help me out.
Yeah, absolutely. This reminds me of something I read about the way Elon Musk describes his own thought process. I don't know if it's a true statement about how he describes it or not, but it certainly seems to fit. And that's the idea of having these mental models, I think is the phrase that Musk used. And we certainly have a lot ourselves. One of the books that is, for me, like one of the best sources of those models that I ever found is a book called Algorithms to Live By. And I won't get into the whole book now, but like one chapter, for example, is on something called overfitting, which is where you have a certain amount of evidence and you draw extrapolations from that evidence that are actually maybe overly precise or whatever, they turn out to be true. Anyway, when I'm in the middle of doing something like that, I'll be like, oh, wait, I'm overfitting right now. And I have that as like a set, like encapsulated mental model that I try to be aware of in decision making.
Yeah, you sort of start to look out for that kind of thing. It's like starting to get into this situation where, oh yeah, this is familiar and I'm doing that thing again. That's not so useful.
Another thing, we're sort of just jumping all over the place on important things to take away from this interview. But, Walker referred to a variety of professions where you don't necessarily need what we would maybe think of as the standard 4-year degree and then grad school and maybe some other kind of grad school and then all of that kind of stuff. Just to name a couple of those, plumbers, electricians, machinists was a thing.
Yeah.
I knew that stuff had to be machined, I guess. Yeah. And I know there's a movie called The Machinist, but somehow it never occurred to me as like a viable, thing. And this, again, is part of what the podcast is for. It's to show you all of the, or not all, but a wide selection of the available career paths. And each of those things, to be clear, does involve some kind of training. I'm not saying you can just walk off the street and be an untrained machinist. I presume that's not a thing.
Yeah. Probably not a big market for those guys.
Right. But, what the training is different from the sort of academic general education, kind of 4-year degree thing.
Yeah, sometimes we talk about, not going to college as an option. And we almost never mean not doing any kind of training or any kind of preparation like that post high school, but there are, vocational type jobs and there are things like that where you can be trained in a completely non-academic, non-college environment and have a career, have a salary or whatever.
And those jobs are absolutely mentally stimulating. They're rewarding. You're providing incredible services. I mean, imagine your life with no plumbing and electricity, like
no machines
or no machines. You need, which to be clear, a machinist is not someone who makes machines. We're just being silly.
Yeah.
But those professions are absolutely 100% as valid as anything that requires, 12 years of schooling or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing, jumping back to the second major thing I think that we were discussing earlier, where Mike mentioned, maybe you're not an engineer, you don't want to start an acoustics related business. Well, first of all, there's a lot in this episode that is specific to and relevant to starting any small business, which a lot of people will either do or be involved with one or something at some point.
Or consider it, or you'll have a friend who does it. You can give them some advice, all of that stuff.
Yeah, it'll come up in one way or another. And that is definitely widely applicable in a lot of ways. But over the course of not just this episode, but many episodes, I think one of the major takeaways for our audience will be that you'll see the commonalities from job to job, and you'll see like this idea that keeps coming up of like employees who care make a big difference, which some people I think kind of get, like they've been in an environment where that is rewarded and some people haven't. And it's kind of noteworthy, like, hey, every single time we talk to somebody who seems to be doing pretty well, like this theme has come up of, be engaged and care about what you're doing and what the results are and everything like that, and have a plan for yourself and be kind of working toward that plan. Even if your plan is, I don't like this job and I'm looking for something else, that can be your plan if that's what makes the most sense, in your situation.
Yes. And again, sort of continuing the theme of jumping around with no real structure. One other thing that I found really interesting here was the way Walker described that, a lot of people who are very highly trained professionals, very successful in their field, put up a lot of buildings and all of those kinds of things successfully. They're all doing acoustic dampening wrong, which was sort of interesting, and that's a niche, a need that Walker identified, not immediately at the beginning of making the company, but over time realized, hey, people are doing this wrong, and I can teach them how to do it properly. And then there's a widespread need for that kind of thing. It's important to realize that no matter how well developed a field is, if there's a portion of the field that people have not really bothered to investigate or test out or whatever, they've just always done it a certain way, it's not a guarantee, but there's a decent chance that they might not be doing that thing in the best possible way.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another thing Walker mentioned when he put up his website. He installed some basic stuff. He looked on YouTube to see how to do that. He set up his thing so people could order that first sound dampening curtain. And he's like, oh, I got an order. Like, that's amazing. And he said, I think that, I forget what the exact term was, but it was some search term on Google that there's traffic, but there was nothing there. There's no good search results. And he kind of shot right up there because he was so relevant and people found him that way. And there is, I feel like it's a natural human inclination to be like, oh, well, it must have been great to just be the guy who had that idea when nobody else had it. But I can't do that now. I can't just go make a sound dampening curtain because now there's like a market for it and everything. And, it's too crowded. It always, like, by necessity, if you go back and look at what somebody else did, yeah, like when they did it, that was an opportunity, and sometimes a similar opportunity will exist right now, but sometimes it'll be a different opportunity. And you really want to avoid, if you can, that mindset of like, well, sure, if I knew that then I would have gone and done it. But what do I do now? How do I know what to do at this point? And he didn't know at the time that was what it was. Also, people go into areas like that where there is already competition and they do it better, or they have like a different take on it that works well. I remember seeing a quote from, I think he was like some guy who ran the patent office in America in 1905. And he was like, we'll probably have to close this down in the next few years because everything has been invented. It's important to realize that is a totally, every age of people living, everybody has thought, well, I guess that's all this stuff. I guess that's all the ideas. Because of course, like, you don't know what the new ideas are yet because nobody's had them. So I think it's really important to try to resist that feeling of, oh, well, if I had known to do this, or if I could just look into the future. Walker didn't look into the future. Like, he had this thing that, this problem that came up right in his own life, and he fixed it. And
I think we can assume, I mean, he's not here right now when we're recording this to tell us if we're right or not, but based on everything else that he shared with us, I think we can assume that if he had tried this sound dampening curtain thing and it hadn't worked,
absolutely,
he was going to do some other thing after that. This wasn't like, I'm only going to do this one thing. I have to make it work.
Here's my one shot.
Right. It was more that he was the sort of personality that wants to get out there, solve new problems, And this is one that he tried. This happened to work. But if it hadn't worked, we know from the way that he switched jobs in the past and other sorts of behaviors like that, he probably would have gone on to try a different thing until he found something that he was happy with.
Yeah, it was interesting. And this sort of connects to another idea I was going to mention, how he said he kind of knew from a young age that he wanted to start a business. He had no particular interest at all in this topic growing up, but the business thing was what he was interested in. And as you said, he didn't know for sure. He couldn't have known that this would have succeeded and would have gone somewhere and everything. And it's clear from what he said, as you mentioned, we can extrapolate or remember basically, because he pretty much directly said this, that he was going to figure out some kind of a business thing to do. This one worked out for him, but you look like you want to say something. So
I do want to say something. Also along the lines of knowing from an early age that he would like to do something at some point for himself. He mentioned having a mentor. I found it very interesting that even though he had the mentor, and mentorship is certainly a topic that has come up in other episodes, and I'm sure will come up again, even though he had that mentor, he was able to say, well, her way of doing stuff is not my way of doing things, but it was extremely helpful to get her input anyway. And that's an important thing to keep in mind too. If you have someone who you think of formally as a mentor, it doesn't mean you have to follow every single thing that they have done. You would be wise probably to give strong consideration to what they suggest. If you respect them enough to, be their mentee in the first place, then of course, probably you want to give some deference to what they say, but you don't have to do everything that a mentor says. And even if you have sort of not impromptu, what's the word, an unofficial kind of mentor or an older person or a more experienced person in your life that you think of as someone, who you sort of follow as a role model, even if they don't know it, following them as a role model does, why can't I talk today?
Civil servant
role model. Following them in that kind of way doesn't obligate you to do every single thing that they do. There might be portions of their approach that you like very much and can benefit from, and other portions where that's less the case. Totally fine.
And it doesn't mean that you have to never talk to them again or that they're useless to you if you find, well, they went down this path. That's not really what I would want to do. You can get a ton of value, and it kind of goes back to the incredible value of this podcast.
You're welcome.
Yeah, again and again, you're welcome. You can find information that might not be exactly directly relevant to what you're doing, but there's so many commonalities across different human enterprises. Any place that involves talking to customers or filling orders or making a website or whatever, these things come up over and over again. Being able to deal with people comes up over and over again.
So for me, I just have one other domain that I would like to approach in this wrap up, and then I will be done talking. And Patrick, you can.
Oh man, I have way more.
Okay, good. This is my last thing. Okay. Well, it's kind of a joint thing. But Walker's sort of approach to education, and specifically, or sort of as a subset of that, the whole test preparation thing, I found it very interesting and heartbreaking, as I mentioned during the interview, that he's a huge reader now, definitely sees the value in reading, which there is a tremendous value in reading.
There really is.
Of all types. And sees the value now, went to a school that was like very demanding and academically rigorous, could not be bothered during his, and I want to be clear, what's frustrating about that for me, it's not him, the student. The student, in my opinion, is sort of like the audience of a movie or something. Like if the movie doesn't keep your attention, that's the movie's fault. That's not your fault, If the
to a point,
to a point, sure, of course,
who could put in a little more effort,
right? But if a curriculum or set of books to read or something, if that's not motivating to students, and by and large, it's clear from looking at the way students don't read books across our whole country and educational system. Our system in general, no matter where you are, is not doing a great job of engaging the majority of the people who would benefit from it. It's just frustrating that here's this person, obviously very intelligent, very driven, even if he wasn't, as goal-oriented in his youth as he is now. I mean, who was? But, that seed of that intellect was obviously present in him. And somehow school just failed to put stuff in front of him that he, would be motivated by and interested to learn. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One of the big things is if you find yourself as a student now thinking, oh God, why do I have to read like Jane Eyre and like all this stuff that doesn't appeal to me? That doesn't mean that all of literature is not worth pursuing. There's something out there for you, I promise. This is just a personal thing, like whether it's certain types of poems, plays, web novel, I don't care what it is. Like there's stuff out there. The fact that high school has not successfully put that in front of you doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
I have a deeper, more important response, but I wanted to mention that it reminds me of a moment in The Simpsons where Marge says to Homer that they should go to a bookstore, and Homer says, "We already have a book," which is one of the funniest moments I've ever seen. But yeah, there is that mentality like, oh, well, I didn't like this book or these 3 books in a row, so, I'm just not into this.
And if you're a teacher listening to this, like, please take it to heart. Honestly, I mean, I know that in most cases you have a set of books that you have to read. It's like determined by the county or the department or whatever. But it's a reminder that there are very intelligent minds sitting in your classroom who are desperate to be entertained and instructed, guided. Literature is like one of the best ways to do that. And we are just falling flat left, right, and center on that.
I think when I have observed this, and Walker's definitely not the first person that I've talked to who has felt this way, and I have loved to read from a young age. I definitely did a lot less reading for pleasure in high school.
I got super good at high school, at having like pretending. Man,
Boy,
today's rough for
pretending
me.
to have read.
Thank you very much.
There
That's exactly what I was trying to say.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. It's another sort of interesting life skill that you pick up. That's not what's intended. But I definitely know a number of people who became way more interested in reading post education, basically, which is very unfortunate.
And it has a lot to do with once you can read the stuff that you want to read or that you feel like you need to read, of course you're interested. Why would you not be?
Yeah, I think that to me, and this gets to a deeper issue with education in general that I'm sure will come up again and again in this podcast.
I think we should try to solve the whole thing right now.
Okay,
no,
sure.
I'm kidding.
I mean, I have, 7 hours. So I think that for a lot of people, this shift that happens, there's going to be people who are interested in literature kind of anyway, and maybe they'll enjoy it middle school, high school without a ton of extra effort, or, even if the curriculum, which may or may not be the teacher's fault, as you pointed out, a lot of teachers are severely limited with what they're allowed to even do. They're kind of told from on high, this is what we're reading and this is what we're doing. And, best of luck to you, which is a whole other issue. But
I don't think anyone wishes them luck. I genuinely, at this point, it's hard to believe that anyone cares. That's very cynical, but that's my takeaway.
Yeah. Here's what we're doing. Good luck. I mean, I didn't mean that last part. Yeah. So I think like the switch that happens afterward is kind of realizing a connection between your actual life and what you're studying. And there's this unfortunate thing that I think goes back a long way, where the school experience for many, many people became just this separate idea. Because like, if you look at it like, as I would like to, like a video game or something where you're kind of like training up in the early stages to get like your skills leveled up or better, so you can go out there and do stuff better, which is what school can be and should be and sometimes is and sometimes isn't. That's way more engaging to think, oh, if I get better at math, then nobody can lie to me about the money I'm supposed to be getting. Or
right. Or that kind of touches on a concept that I hear frequently, and I understand where it comes from. It might sound like I would even agree with it based on what I've just said, but I don't, which is when people say, well, why am I learning trigonometry? I'm never going to like have to build triangles in real life, which is true. You aren't.
And Walker said at one point, he was like, oh, there's this pretty advanced formula I use all the time. He's like, it actually, here's like the shocking twist at the end, actually use that math that I learned.
Yeah. And so I would draw a distinction between specific mathematical, scientific, historical facts that, you're probably never going to need to know in terms of like a life or death or work oriented situation. You're never going to need to know exactly what Napoleon Bonaparte did or exactly what SOHCAHTOA means and how it was derived. Probably,
well, you might,
but probably it can be argued that any individual student, if you look at the whole set of facts that they learn in school, 80% of that probably will never come up again in their life. That is 100% true. But the way of thinking about it is what is being modeled there. And that's what's worth learning. So yes, you'll probably never use this specific formula again, because you'll never need to calculate the area of a circle or something. But the idea of formulaic thinking is what you learn, that kind of thing. So maybe you could argue when we talk about literature and how people are being forced to read books that they don't like, maybe being able to fake your way through having read something, maybe that is the valuable skill. I hope that that's not the goal. But I mean, there are works of literature that do speak directly to people and are directly relevant. Game of Thrones is a fantastic example. Everyone I know who's read Game of Thrones, there's someone or something somewhere in there that they're like, oh, even though this is a fake thing set with like dragons and medieval whatever, this relationship between these two people is heavily similar to my relationship like this or this other thing that I observed, and really helps me think about it. You could be doing that with literature and we aren't. And
let's specify read and not watched, because we're not endorsing any aspect of the watching experience of Game of Thrones.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not. I don't want to be on record.
Also, yeah, no, that's very true. Yeah. And I would like to point out, there's no way to prove it, but I was early on that. Several seasons in, I was like, they are losing. This is not going to end well.
That's
I can.
Whole other podcast.
Yeah, yes. I can show you my group texts from the time. I was super popular about that. So anyway, yeah, but that was one thing. He's now a voracious reader, clearly an organized thinker. And for whatever reason, that was just a total miss for him in high school. And I know from having worked with lots and lots of kids, gone to lots and lots of conferences and talked to lots of teachers about this, that is a very common thing. And it's just, yeah, frustrating. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to say about him academically, which I found very interesting, I think he's the first person I've spoken to in a long time who welcomed the opportunity to take practice tests and viewed it as like, oh, you know, this is like a thing. I don't know if he said this specifically or if I just took it away, but he seemed to view it as like fun, you know, like playing a video game, trying to get your score up.
Skill building,
exactly. And that's a great way to look at it. That's how Patrick and I looked at it, for sure. If you can come to look at it that way. And there's certainly like tons of structure and patterns. And, you know, for all of my complaints that I just had about education, I'm actually not as much against standardized testing as most people are, because I know that a standardized test is an opportunity to use mental models and, very disciplined thinking, prioritizing thing. Like it actually is, if you approach it in the way that I recommend you approach it, you know, it is actually a very good way to develop a lot of useful life skills. Problem solving, yeah. Like legitimately, yes, problem solving. And yeah, so the way that he was like, oh, I used to love taking practice tests. That's awesome. And if you can come to have that viewpoint of like gamify it in your head, like, okay, you know, last time I tried 10 questions, I missed 7 of them. Now I understand why I did that. And now I'm only missing 4, which if you don't know this, it's because the questions repeat themselves over and over again. So if you're missing 7 questions, it doesn't mean you don't know 7 things. It probably means you don't know 1 or 2 things that got a couple skills asked about 7 times. I shouldn't even say knowing it. It's a skill that you're missing that gets asked about repeatedly. Anyway, it was nice to hear that. And if you're listening to this, there's a very good chance you will eventually take some kind of standardized test. I would strongly advise you to try to have that mindset going into the practice if you can, of like, oh, this is fun and it's a way for me to show that I, you know, am acquiring a set of skills. And those skills are honestly often useful well beyond testing if you acquire them correctly.
Yeah. It kind of makes me think when you describe that, the mindset about practice tests, it's almost like I used to watch, I think this show might still be on, American Ninja Warrior, which is just like this big crazy obstacle course. And it's so cool looking and I just want to try it so bad. And it was originally, there was like multiple versions of the show. I don't know what it was, but I remember thinking like, I'd love to go do that. And if they, I don't know if they do this or not, but, you know, say you were going to go on American Ninja Warrior tomorrow and you were going to go on that obstacle course and you've seen it, you know, on TV, but you haven't had a chance to do it. The practice test is almost like somebody like left the door unlocked the night before. And it's like, look, you can just come in here and check all this stuff out now. You know what I mean? You can see this is a real course, and like the practice test, these are real practice tests. You can see what it's like ahead of time. Imagine, like, obviously that's going to be super helpful if you could kind of like sneak into the facility, so to speak, have it all like laid out for you, see exactly everything that's going to be on there. I mean, the SAT won't be word for word what's going to be on there, but it's all the same standardized concepts that will appear. And once you know what those concepts are and how to look for them and everything, which of course is how we teach our approach to test preparation, it's a lot like that. It's like that feeling of, wow, this is an important thing, even if I don't see the lifelong skill building value of it. I know that the score at least is important for pretty much everybody. This is an important thing, and I can have this sort of advantage. Like, this is so valuable to have these real practice tests ahead of time. When Walker obviously appreciated that, which is cool.
Yeah, and that actually leads me to one last thing on the topic of standardized test taking, which is not something I planned to be speaking about in this outro, but here we are. So when I was just now talking about taking practice tests, we both were talking about taking practice tests. I was sort of, in my mind, the 2 ways to approach it were you're taking them and you don't like it, or you're taking them and you try to like it. That's because we're so enmeshed in taking standardized tests effectively that, like, in our minds, of course, you're going to take some practice tests. I should point out, there's like the majority of people who take the SAT or the ACT or subject tests or any of those kinds of things, AP, IB tests, whatever. The majority of them never actually take a practice test, like an official practice test made by the same company that's making the test that you're going to take on test day. So the College Board or ACT Inc. or whatever. most test takers never do that. And even if you don't end up, using any of our test preparation products or methods or whatever, which of course is totally fine, do yourself a favor and definitely take a practice test.
Absolutely.
So you should absolutely take one. Again, I'm just sort of assuming you're going to, but that's not a valid assumption. Most people don't. So you should take one. And then when you take it, try to have fun. Like those are the two things together.
Try to have fun might be a tall order, but try to see the value in it. I mean, if you can have fun, great. A lot of people can't, but try to recognize the value of working with it. And obviously, we write test preparation materials. We do that, and we certainly we recommend them. We wrote them because we think that they're really, really good and really helpful.
It would be funny to have written them and be like, well, don't use ours.
Be smart about it.
I just spent years writing this thing, and it's hundreds of pages long, and it crashed my computer many, many times. But don't
hundreds of thousands of words, many sleepless nights. So we obviously very strongly recommend our own materials. We're very proud of them. But even more than using our materials, it's more important to use practice tests. If somebody said I can only do one or the other, we would definitely say practice tests are a must.
Yeah, and practice tests from real source, like actual practice tests, because without getting too far into it, like those are the things that are guaranteed to follow the same patterns, constraints, or whatever as the test on test day.
It's like breaking into the wrong obstacle course facility and preparing for the wrong obstacles.
If you use a practice test for
that analogy, yeah.
Anyway.
So I have like a million things to say. Not a million, but I have a few.
It's just so long.
I know. I'll try to kind of rattle them off a little bit that I think they're very interesting.
Okay, hit me.
Jump in. All right, here comes rapid fire. It was very interesting when he described that he and his friends were trying to come up with business ideas, and his, I think, girlfriend at the time was studying upstairs. It was like, oh, it's so loud down there. I can hear you. Like it seems like a scene in a movie or like a made up thing that was actually what they ended up doing, was this problem that came up right in the middle of their actual lives. And so often that is what happens with a business or a new idea or something like that, is you're living in that problem. So what the problem is and you realize that it's real, and it's not a guarantee that anything you try with that sort of beginning is going to be successful, but it's a logical place to start. And it's where a lot of people start. Yeah.
And there's an old proverb related to that, which is necessity is the mother of invention. When I was a kid, I'm just remembering we used to learn proverbs in school. I don't mean not religious proverbs, but sayings like
aphorisms.
That. Yeah. And they kind of are also mental models a little bit.
Yeah.
Not exactly. But if you're trying to think of a problem to solve, well, what are the problems that you have? Those are the ones that need solving.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was very interesting. And again, sounds like made up, but is not. And I think you'll find if you are engaged with some kind of goal, whether it's starting your own business or having a certain job, that you will find yourself in situations like that. I feel like I have, where I'm like, oh, this almost seems like scripted. That these things are sort of falling together in a way that I wouldn't have predicted or foreseen or aimed for in the beginning. It was more that, you just try to make the next decision you can. That's the best decision that makes sense to you at the time. And then you'll find yourself saying, oh, this sort of fell together in an interesting way. I love the story of when he kind of realized, I think it was when he was making maybe the prototype for that curtain that his mom taught him how to sew, it's a cool thing. Again, he didn't have an interest in sewing or acoustics or whatever. It was, I want to have a business. I want to be in that world. This is the path kind of in front of me. I'm going to learn this skill that I never would have thought I was going to learn, otherwise. And you sit down and you do it. And it was awesome that he had his mom there. I'm sure that you could also have learned from YouTube. He said YouTube teaches him almost everything. So even if he didn't have a close family, a family relative who could teach it to him, he still could have gotten there. But that's a really cool example of, here's the situation I'm in. I didn't expect to need to use a sewing machine, but I'm going to figure it out.
Along those lines too, I like his quote about how, because of his classes in product design and those kinds of things, he just sort of knew already that everything can be reverse engineered and taken apart. It's true. I think his phrase was, you can make anything, which is true. If you have the materials,
somebody made it.
That has been right. Someone has made it. There's no magic, whatever. There's no limitation in theory to the things that you can make. And certainly that would include prototypes for curtains. You can just make one even if you don't know how.
Yeah, another cool thing to think about with that is curtains have existed. I'm not a curtain historian, but for a long time, and you might think how many different new kinds of curtains are there? But this thing that started out was,
I know we had them when I was a kid, so it's at least 40 years of
exactly.
curtains.
But there could still be obviously a thing on Google that there's like no traffic for because somebody hasn't come up with a good way to do this. I think you said one of them that somebody else made was a sheet that you like nailed into the wall or something. Like,
I just had an idea. Feel free to steal this.
Okay.
What about sound amplifying curtains?
Yeah.
What about curtains that make it unbearably loud in whatever room you're in? What about that? That's a thing. Well, it's not a thing, but it could be a thing.
We'll get back to you and see how Mike's.
And that was silly and stupid, obviously, but it does actually point out a very valuable mental model. And this is the following thing is a very serious thing that people genuinely discuss and use. This mental model is what if I did exactly the opposite? Like, okay, the advice is to do X. What if I did exactly the opposite of X? What would happen? It doesn't mean you should do the opposite of X, but it often will lead to interesting insights, either about new things you could do or about why it is that everyone doesn't do those things. But it's useful to know. So kind of stupid, but sound dampening curtain. Okay, that's a thing. What about a sound amplifying curtain? Why not? Or a light dampening curtain or a sound dampening other thing. But you know what I mean? You can kind of just like spin out ideas from an existing idea using these mental models.
I remember just watching an interview, I think, with a guy who started Expedia or Travelocity, one of those early sites. This was back in the day when those were new. It was a new idea. This was like the first big one of those. And this was the guy, I think, who had started it, or one of the two guys or something, one of the two people behind it from the very beginning. And he was talking about brainstorming sessions. And they talked about how they would start with something that was completely not doable. Like, this would be the best possible thing. And I think he described, it was like if you were to get fast food, the model they started with was the best thing would be if you just drove your car by it and they had like a cannon and they fired it into your open car window as you were driving by.
And you never had to stop.
Yeah. So they knew your order already or whatever. And they're like, okay, that can't happen. But like, let's work back from that. So it's not uncommon to start with something that's totally unreasonable or totally unhelpful or something. If you're having a mental block and you stop somewhere, then it means that the way you're thinking about it, it's not effective. So like, just try a different thing. It takes a few minutes maybe, and you might have something unexpected.
If memory serves, because I saw that too, I think that was the CEO or founder or something of Priceline.
Priceline sounds right.
And they would do another exercise in their meetings, which was they had a guy or person whose job was just to think of what can we do now that wasn't possible last time we had this meeting? Like, how has technology changed or the laws have changed? Like, what's a thing last time we talked about this? We didn't think we could do it. Now we can do it. Doesn't mean you're going to do it. But like, what are the new parameters in which we're operating? And that, again, is just a mental model. What's a thing I can do now that I couldn't do 5 years ago?
So many blocks for new and useful ideas are assumptions that people are making about limitations or needs or anything like that. Yeah, and the more you can be aware of, what assumptions are we making that might not be valid, or what assumption has changed since last time, that's going to make a difference. A
related concept to this, by the way, and not to stray too far into this because this could be the subject of its own, not just podcast episode, but like series of podcasts. A related concept for this that you hear a lot sort of as a buzzword now is systems thinking, which is like thinking about things in terms of systems.
Oh.
Which, by the way, is also how we approach standardized tests. I mean, we were doing it before people popularized the phrase systems thinking, but that's that. And also reasoning from first principles is a phrase that you hear often. And it's the same kind of thing. Like, hey, what are the like bare minimum constraints, the laws of physics, the actual laws? Like, what are the things I can't do?
Yeah.
And what are the things I can do and must do and want to achieve and so on? And how does all of that play together without assuming that everybody else's way of thinking about this is necessarily valid? Like, how would I get from the very bare bones of the problem and the constraints to my own solution?
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I wanted to mention was it's cool that he had this business concept and then he went on YouTube and learned HTML, CSS, Java, PHP, whatever, to set up his own WordPress site. And to be clear, he didn't become a master of any of those things, but in the path of getting where he wanted and making his own site, he encountered these things. You go online. And this is kind of the flip side of what we were talking about earlier. Oh, I wish I could have known that ahead of time. I wish I, could have had that foresight that nobody can really have. And it's a very human thing to kind of use that as an excuse. Your brain, a lot of times there's a part of anybody's brain that kind of wants to be like lazy or allow you to not make that effort.
I still very frequently wish I had bought Bitcoin back when that was like a...
Exactly. Yeah. So the flip side of that is we all fortunately live at a time where we have YouTube. Like, you can learn so much, not even in your room, in a park, anywhere, literally anywhere. If you have a smartphone, or if you don't, you can go to a library and stream things. There is so much information available in a way that was not even true even 10 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. And the fact everything about living in our age is not an advantage, but this is an enormous advantage for people who will use it and be aware of it.
I would add to that, and this is partially for reasons that we have encountered personally, not everything that's on YouTube is reliable. Not everything that's
for sure
out there in the internet is something you should definitely follow 100%. But it's a perspective on a problem. And for some problems, like for example, if you have a broken dishwasher, this happened to me when we were traveling a few months ago. The dishwasher in our Airbnb broke. I don't know anything about dishwashers, but I know how to Google the name of the dishwasher, like what the problem is. And you find some YouTube videos, and in that kind of limited situation, people are taking the dishwasher apart. Like I can follow step by step. I can see that this thing is blocking this other thing. So you have like that end of the spectrum where YouTube or any kind of tutorial is like pretty definitely dead on. At the other end of the spectrum, things like parenting or, what's the best kind of diet to follow or whatever, like there, it's a little bit less obvious that a certain person is definitely correct. But just the fact that you have access to all of these different takes on it and you can weigh for yourself, does this seem to fit with what I'm experiencing? Does it look like this person? Does it sound like this person has really thought this through? Like, is what they're saying coherent and whatever? Like, it's incredible that you can do that now across such a wide variety of disciplines and problems that didn't exist before.
Yeah, it's this, in my experience, these resources are most useful for this kind of like commodity, like skills information where it's, how do I change this block from blue to green on my website, or how do I make this font bigger? Or
although even that, there's like dozens of ways to do, but
for sure
you can see that there's this a way.
Yeah, and this guy has, this YouTuber, what is the noun? Has 20,000 views on this video and lots of good comments, and it's a pretty straightforward thing to like it. So yeah, we're not saying, hey, take your life savings and invest in something that some person in a YouTube video tells you to do. Like, it's not an infallible resource, but in this kind of scenario, if I want to install WordPress, if I want to do certain specific skills, use a sewing machine, fix a dishwasher, as you said. My uncle fixes a lot of cars, and he has told me that almost anything that you do with a car, you can find a YouTube video that's specifically like that part in that car, and he uses it all the time, and he's fixed a ton of stuff. And so it's not a perfect resource, but we don't endorse it fully with no qualifications or anything. But obviously, Walker made really great use of that.
I'd like to jump in with a question. Is this the first episode for which our post-episode discussion is longer than the episode?
We're getting there.
Okay, good.
Cool. So super quickly. Oh, another huge thing that I did definitely want to mention, and maybe I'll try to wrap it up.
No, I mean, I do think we should talk about it. It's
I understand.
It's a joint fault of both of ours. We like to talk about these things.
We do.
I just find it amusing. That's
there's so much to analyze. So, and this is the other side of the, I wish I could have known to make that thing at that time mentality. So this is at least a 3-sided issue. His business pivoted, I think, a few years ago from selling to consumers this original product, which he said, did well. But then he kept getting calls from people who said, oh, my neighbors are loud, and what can I do about that? And Walker was like, well, as far as I know, nothing. At this point, the building has been built. There's a limit to what you can really do. And he could have, and a lot of people would have, just thought, I get these calls from people, but they're not my audience. They're not my customers. But instead, he got it enough that he pivoted. He looked into it. He realized that he could get in with the people building the buildings in the first place. That was a whole new direction for his business. So on the one hand, sure, he got that initial situation where he found that his product pages ranked well in Google because there was limited competition, and he was really, he found like an untapped market. And that's true. But it seems like the bulk, or from what he said, the bulk of what his business is now isn't even that. That was kind of an inroad to this other thing that he discovered. And it was on him to recognize that and make that change and do it well and read all the textbooks, as you said, get the information and everything and take advantage of that.
And we touched on it briefly earlier, but that distinction between a B2C business and a B2B business, I'm mentioning this because I'm assuming most of our audience will not be familiar with that. And it's actually very important. B2C is like the business sells to customers, like end user people, just sort of average individual people operating as people. Versus a B2C business is one that sells, B2B, is one that sells to other businesses. So a classic example would be a grocery store is a B2C business. The customers come in and they buy fruits, vegetables, whatever. But the suppliers who sell the vegetables to the grocery store, those are B2B businesses. Their clients are other businesses. And it might not sound like that's a huge difference if you're not familiar with sort of business and work in general, but it is actually a very big difference. And from an office life standpoint, an employee sort of standpoint, it's one thing to sell, for example, to other businesses and one thing to sell to customers. It's one thing to serve businesses and one thing to serve customers. If you think about the show The Office, that was a B2B company. That was a paper company that sold paper to other companies. And obviously it was a comedic like take on all of that. But in the same way that like those people, those characters in that show, they weren't thinking, how can I appeal to like a wide audience of people who might want to buy paper? They were specifically thinking, well, here's this one other company that might want to buy the paper. And what are they, you know, like it's just a very different way of thinking about stuff.
Fewer leads that are much bigger generally.
Right. And the way the business is done, all of those kinds of types of personalities that succeed in those two environments, all that stuff is generally very different. So it might not sound like going from selling to individuals buying on the internet to big construction companies. It might not sound like a giant change if you're not familiar with how those things work. It is actually a huge change. Like it's just a completely different viewpoint in terms of, you know, how you are going to deliver what you deliver and the types of legalities and just all the other practical considerations that go with it. It's very different.
Yeah. And there's just so much, but
well, at this point, I feel like we've
heard it.
And I'm as guilty, but we're kind of just repeating everything that he already said. It was very useful. How about that? Don't even listen to us talk anymore. Just go back and listen to it again.
Yeah. Slow-mo.
Repeatedly.
Yeah. So anyway, super, super interesting. Starting a business, engineering stuff, school stuff, the NASA thing, which we didn't even talk about a little bit with the whole, like the way that it worked, which was unexpected. But
which was don't work too hard on it. No, I should add, I know other people who work for NASA, either as a contractor or as an employee. They are hardworking people. I don't want to suggest but in his particular, and in the limited,
the specific time that he was there was
right,
and funding was low, and everything was sort of scarce. So
and his specific boss, and also his specific personality. You know, he is somebody who, for sure, you can tell is going to work as hard as possible. So maybe that boss wasn't going to everybody saying, hey, stop working so hard. Like maybe it was just this one employee who's doing 5 people's jobs or whatever. You specifically, please stop working so hard.
Yeah, Walker said he was young. He was out of school. He had a fire in his belly or whatever. And he just really wanted to get going on something. And that just wasn't the environment where he...
So I don't want to make it sound like we're looking down on like all of NASA or all of government contract. It's not that at all. It's just this one specific case.
This story in particular. So yes, thank you, Walker. That was... super enlightening. You could tell that Mike and I are just holding ourselves back from talking for another 40 minutes about this. But
yeah, I almost find it impossible to believe that anyone is still listening. And so I feel like now would be a time, if you had something to get off your chest you didn't want anybody to hear, now would be the time to say it. Oh, well, can't think of anything.
Okay.
Life's an open book.
It is. So yeah, that's all for now. If you like the show, please take a moment to rate and review us on iTunes or the podcast player of your choice. And of course, if you want to hear more episodes, remember to subscribe as well. You can find our SAT Prep Black Book and ACT Prep Black Book on Amazon.com, and you can find our online video courses on QuestPrep.com. Please tune in for our next episode coming up in a couple of weeks. And in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us on our Quest Prep Facebook page or the Quest Prep YouTube channel.
This episode was hosted by myself, Mike Barrett, and my brother, Patrick Barrett. Our guest was Walker Peak. Every musical element was created and performed by Parker Hale Hastings. All the planets in our solar system could fit between the Earth and the Moon with room to spare. And here's that special segment we promised you on the differences between the SAT and the ACT. Now, on the surface, there are clearly some major differences between the SAT and the ACT. The most obvious one for most people is that the ACT includes something that it calls a science section, while the SAT does not include something that it calls a science section. Also, ACT math questions have 5 answer choices, while the rest of the ACT questions and all of the multiple choice SAT questions have 4 answer choices. Another superficial difference is that the SAT math section includes a set of questions where you have to grid in your answer instead of picking from a set of provided choices. And the tests also have different numbers of questions and different time limits for each section, and the sections are presented in different orders. So it's true that if you just take things at face value, the 2 tests might seem different. But lots of things in life should not be taken at face value, and this is one of them. The truth is that those differences on the surface don't actually have any real effect at all on the best way to approach either test. When you understand how the individual questions on both tests are written, you see that they're actually highly similar. Most of the techniques that work on one test will also work almost exactly as well on the other test. And this applies even to some things that really seem like they would only be valid for one test or the other. For example, let's talk science. So doing well on the ACT science section actually requires much less scientific knowledge than most people would think. The ACT science section mostly consists of reading comprehension questions related to passages about scientific studies and experiments, and you don't need to know obscure scientific concepts to answer any of those questions. The passages on the science section contain text and figures that you use to answer the questions, and in most cases, you won't have any prior experience with the topics being discussed in a particular passage, just as you normally wouldn't have any prior experience with the topic of a passage on the reading or the English sections of the ACT. So the ACT science section is actually primarily a test of your ability to read text and figures carefully, and not a test of how much science you already know when you walk in the door. Some questions will require simple estimation or math knowledge, like knowing that 100 times 10 is 1,000, and a handful of questions do require basic scientific knowledge, like knowing that H2O is the chemical formula for water, something along those lines. But the key skill that will be the deciding factor on almost every question on the ACT science section is the ability to read figures and texts carefully. So that includes noticing things like the labels on a diagram or the particular units in a measurement, stuff like that. And it turns out that those key skills are also used on the SAT to answer questions that rely on data and figures that appear on the SAT. It's just that the SAT asks fewer questions about each chart or graph that appears on the SAT, and the SAT inserts those kinds of data-based questions in each section of the test rather than lumping them all together and having a separate section that it calls a science section. So if you are a well-trained test taker and you know how to analyze and deconstruct these kinds of questions by using your close reading skills, your knowledge of answer choice patterns, and so on, then you can take that exact same skill set and apply it perfectly well to the relevant questions on either test. So it's not like the ACT actually rewards you for being a good high school science student, which is what most people mistakenly think the ACT science section is for. Both tests instead reward you for reading graphs and passages and answer choices very carefully. So again, even though the tests seem a bit different on the surface, the majority of individual questions that could appear on an official SAT could also appear on an official ACT, and vice versa. Now, it's true that there are some other small differences besides the ones that I've already mentioned. For example, there are a few specific math or grammar concepts that might appear on one test but don't appear on the other. But there aren't a ton of those kinds of concepts in the first place, and none of them are extremely advanced. And most test takers don't even notice that some ideas appear only on one test and not on the other. In fact, honestly, that's the kind of thing you really only notice by being completely obsessed with breaking down standardized tests for some reason, like we are. But in terms of the fundamental strategies that you should be using on test day, and in terms of the task of approaching either test on a question-by-question basis in the most effective and efficient way possible, the two tests are very, very similar. For example, the single most important skill on all sections of both tests is reading carefully. The math sections on both tests mostly rely on relatively basic concepts presented in unusual ways. And even the ACT science section, as we just saw, is a lot like a reading section on either test with some math and diagrams thrown in, along with a very little bit of basic scientific knowledge that comes up on a few questions. Techniques like the vertical scan and advanced backsolving still apply extremely well to both tests, and the wrong answer patterns for similar questions on both tests are often identical. And even though the tests have different time constraints, the time management process for deciding which question to work on next still applies equally well across both tests. And of course, it's still true that if you know how to answer each question in the most efficient way possible, then you'll find that you have more than enough time to answer each question with total confidence without rushing on either test. I could go on, but I'm sure you get the idea by now. The tests just aren't actually that different when you know how they really work and when you think about them on a question-by-question basis, which is how a trained test taker should be thinking of any test. Now, if you're not familiar with the way that we approach standardized tests, then you may be wondering why the SAT and the ACT ended up being so similar. The basic reason, without going into too many details, is that they're actually both designed to accomplish the same task. They both need to provide a standardized, reliable, consistent measure of the performance of a huge group of college applicants year after year after year. And since they must accomplish the same goal and they're bound by the same constraints in terms of things like time and scale and so on, the result is they're a lot alike. And at this point, you might be thinking to yourself that you know some test takers who did much better on one test than on the other one. And how can that be possible if everything that I'm saying is true? Well, that is definitely a real thing. There definitely are people who just naturally prefer the SAT over the ACT, or the other way around, the ACT over the SAT, depending on the person. And scores do sometimes reflect those preferences. In my experience, a lot of those preferences and performance differences are just mental. A student is like told by a teacher or guidance counselor or somebody that one of the tests will probably be easier for that particular student. And then that kind of allows the student to be more relaxed when taking the test, or the other way around, makes them more nervous when they take the other one. And it does genuinely seem easier or harder because the test taker is more or less nervous based on the advice that they were given by somebody else. And it's also true that some test takers are more affected by things like differences in time limits or the number of answer choices on a question or things like that. So these little differences in structure, timing, and some question subtypes and things like that might contribute to the scoring differences that some test takers experience, especially if they're untrained test takers who don't really realize what the tests are actually rewarding. But for most test takers, especially for trained test takers, there's no way to predict whether you'll do better on the SAT or the ACT until you try them both, because, again, they're highly similar with just a few superficial differences. Some people score at a higher percentile on the SAT, and some people score at a higher percentile on the ACT. And luckily, trying them both does not mean that you have to do twice as much prep work, because the same fundamental techniques and concepts, say it with me, cover the vast majority of questions on both tests. And the differences between what's allowed to appear on some questions on the two tests are so minor that most test takers never even realize them. And all of this is a big part of the reason why we offer our SAT and ACT video courses as a bundle. If you sign up for either course, then you automatically get unlimited lifetime access to both courses. That way, you can be fully prepared for whichever test you eventually decide to take, or maybe you'll decide to try both. And remember that colleges, for their part, don't care at all which of these two tests you take. Also remember that our video course comes with the best guarantee in test prep, which is a 30-day, no questions asked, 100% money-back guarantee. So if you try the videos and you don't like them, we don't want to keep your money. And our video course costs significantly less than most other options out there. In fact, lifetime access to both the SAT and the ACT courses together is less than the cost of 15 minutes of phone tutoring with me. So for more on our books and video courses, head over to questprep.com or search for the SAT Prep Black Book and the ACT Prep Black Book on Amazon.com. Thanks.